All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another year of our NEMSIS annual meeting here in beautiful Park City. We couldn't have dialed in better weather. For those of you who are from the warmer climates, this is a beautiful start to a Park City winter. So we had some snow here about a week ago, and we thought maybe we'd have some this week for you, but it looks like we're going to have a nice, clean week. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I know how hard you work. I get emails from you late at night. You respond to my emails at ridiculous times in the evenings. And I know that you're not over-resourced in your offices so that when you're away, you're still responsible for the work that you're doing there. And I appreciate that time, and I realize how valuable it is. We're going to have a great list of speakers for you today. One of the tasks that I gave the TAC when they were planning this is that regardless of who spoke and regardless of what the topic was in each session, there had to be some takeaway. There has to be some reason for having that person here. There's something of value that we want to get. I didn't want to bring you here and just put one person in front of you to talk to you about a topic and go to the next topic and to the next topic. So everything that we have planned has some sort of business result out of it for NEMSIS. And we'll talk about those at the end of today. So just cover a couple topics here. As I said, welcome to Park City. My name is Eric Chaney. I am one of the EMS specialists in NHTSA's Office of EMS, and there my primary responsibility is all things NEMSIS. So in terms of any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, they all come to me. I'm happy to address those. Any compliments, you can give those to Dr. Mann here in the front row. I want to review a few items about Park City. You're at 7,000 feet in altitude. And if you're not accustomed to that, what it means to you is drink lots of water. You're getting dehydrated and you just don't know it. Maybe you feel that headache or you feel a little lightheaded. Trust me, the water will help a great deal. Restrooms are located on each floor. If you go out where registration was, just past the elevators, turn right and go down the hall. The men's room and ladies' room is there, and there's one on each floor. Our evening agenda and activities, Clay will be addressing those and talking about those with you in just a few moments. There's a couple different options for you tonight. If you've never been to Park City, I highly recommend it. If you've not had ice cream at the Java Cow, I highly recommend that as well. See the nice ladies out front, and they'll make sure they can accommodate you. We're going to be sharing the meeting evaluation information that we do, that you provide us. We'll be sharing the slide presentations. We will be sharing any and all comments that we receive after the meeting. It usually takes us a few weeks to synthesize all that and take that and get it available to you. So don't feel like you have to take pictures of all the slides and capture something. And if you missed it, don't worry, we're going to get it for you. That's not a problem. The Wi-Fi username, Marriott Bonvoy_conference. I know many of you have your personal hotspots. If you have any problems with connectivity, just let us know and we'll take care of you. If you need a charge, we have some charging stations set up in the back with plenty of power strips that you can power up at just about any time. Now, I do want to cover some ground rules. For many of you that I've been on calls with, you know that you can tell me anything you want to do or anything you want to tell me. You can say anything you want to say to me and you will not hurt my feelings. As a side for everyone else, please respect each other's opinions. There are a lot of people in this room. There are a lot of different representatives of different organizations, of different vendors, different states, all with varying opinions and at various stages of your NEMSIS utilization. So please respect each other's opinions, set aside any of your market relationships, focus on the bottlenecks and think about the solutions that we need for the problems that we have before us for NEMSIS. Share your opinions, but please be mindful of others. We want to hear your opinion, but we do not want to hear your opinion on everything. So focus on strategy. What do we need to do to keep NEMSIS moving forward? What do we need to do to make NEMSIS successful? And please let us know your thoughts. You're getting 3 hours of continuing education. The certificates are out front for each individual that needs those. That's 3 hours a day. If you have questions about that, please let me know. Our next presentation is going to be done by GAM Wijetunge, and I'm going to give you some background on GAM and on NEMSIS in our office while Kevin updates his presentation here. GAM is my boss, so you'll notice he's the only person I made notes for the introduction today. GAM is not only the advocate for EMS within the Department of Transportation, he's the advocate for NEMSIS, up the food chain to the Secretary's office. So what that means is that he answers questions on all topics related to EMS, not just transportation, on a routine basis. And for years, that meant traffic graphics and traffic information and questions about the Federal Interagency Committee on EMS and NEMSAC meetings and follow-up NEMSAC meetings with information to the Secretary's office. But now I think if you ask him what his most frequent questions are going to be about, it's going to be about NEMSIS data and questions about NEMSIS in general. And these questions not only come from DOT anymore, or not just from the administrator's office at NHTSA, but from the Secretary's office at DOT and the Secretary's offices in other federal agencies, including the White House. So we routinely answer press questions. We get probably one request a day for the public access data set to be sent out now. And those numbers just keep increasing. So NEMSIS has become probably GAM's target for questions and I don't know, hindrances or probably annoyances in some ways. And then if you really want to get him, ask him about interagency agreements and how they work to keep things like ARPA satisfied with data and working with ONDCP and the Office of Climate Change as well. So GAM is a huge advocate for NEMSIS and keeps us on track, keeps us resourced, keeps our budgets moving forward. And with that, GAM Wijetunge, the Director of the Office of EMS.
Thank you, Eric. You can see what Eric has to put up with. My slide deck was uploaded by staff on Friday, and I just ran back to the room yesterday. I was like, that was Friday. I had ideas at about 3 a.m, so did make a little last minute changes. Let me start off with an apology because I've been a field provider for 29 years now. So started off with the Scantron forms and have eventually graduated to many electronic patient care reports. And I know for a fact that I have sent you all a lot of bad ICD-10 codes. And I never thought that I would have to be held to account for that. But hey, here's karma if there ever was one. So I'm going to be talking about post-crash care, but we're going to kick things off with a quiz, and there is a prize. Can anyone tell me who this lady is? Who called it out? You're right. Here, come get your prize. There's only one. Yeah, this is Nikki Taylor, who at the age of 48 now, she's mother of 2, married to a retired NASCAR driver, and at the age of 48, she has once again, as of February, become a spokesmodel for CoverGirl, as well as a spokesmodel for the American Red Cross. And there is no prize for the next question I'm going to throw out because I gave away the one I had. But obviously, it's taken Nikki Taylor a lot of talent, hard work, and natural gifts to get where she is in life, but there is one key event in her life that got her to this moment as to come out of retirement and be a supermodel again. Can anyone tell me what that key event in her life was? Yeah. I borrowed this from Getty Images with permission. In April of 2001, Nikki was the front passenger in a vehicle being driven by her boyfriend at the time, who was talking on his cell phone. She had an automatic shoulder belt on, unfortunately no lap belt, according to public reports. The driver lost control of the car and went straight into the pole that you see there at the corner of Glen Iris and Ponce de Leon in Atlanta. There were many things that went right for her. Number one, they were a 10-minute drive from Grady Memorial Level 1 Trauma Center in downtown Atlanta. The paramedics that responded to the scene and gave her good care were using the best know-how that we had at the time. So, she probably got, the driver actually walked out of the vehicle. She collapsed on the pavement. She was transported to Grady, ended up, by the time she got to the surgeon's table, coded on the table, and they worked her. She got 100 units of blood in the OR just for them to get her heart started again, and then spent the next 6 months in the ICU. Received an additional, over the course of her stay, received an additional 200 units of blood. So roughly 300 donors donated blood to keep Nikki Taylor alive. What she didn't receive on the scene is blood transfusion by paramedics. In all likelihood, what they gave her was large volumes of isotonic fluid. And that was the best practice at the time. Can anyone tell me who this is? His name's Robert Keith Cannon. And this is a photo of him before he took over as director of the Division of Medical Sciences at the National Academy of Sciences. But before that, as a young man, about 20 years old, he was a British infantry lieutenant in World War I, where he was injured in combat twice, including he was injured in combat at the Battle of Ypres in Belgium in 1917, the single worst day of warfare in human history up to that point. 50,000 dead in a single day of many causes. When Keith Cannon was injured in combat, he likely had tourniquets applied, and he almost certainly would have received a whole blood transfusion at a Ford hospital just a few minutes from the front line. And he survived the war, went on to get his doctorate in biochemistry, and through a distinguished career was eventually appointed as director of the Division of Medical Sciences, which would eventually become the National Academy of Medicine. Early in the 1960s, he sat down with two other physician war veterans, one of whom was Dr. John Howard. And at that point, they commissioned the development of accidental death and disability. And I'm guessing there's some folks in here who are familiar with that report, but it was really the emergence of modern EMS systems, as well as the modern approach to highway safety in the United States. I'll spare you the rest of the history, but there was a lot of learning coming out of that war, out of World War I and Korea and Vietnam, that was lost in those interwar periods. In World War I, we knew that whole blood saved combat victims. And in between wars, we lost that knowledge, as well as the knowledge of the benefit of tourniquets. It's a known phenomenon called the Walker dip. Medical personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan are very familiar with this phenomenon, and they relearned a lot of lessons, and as you know, have begun translating those back into civilian practice. In 2016, the National Academies issued a report calling for the elimination of preventable deaths in the emergency setting, and they've estimated that 20% of deaths in the emergency setting are preventable with optimal care. Within the office, we've adopted their practice for how we approach care, and it's a practice of using focused empiricism. So when there's an extreme urgency and we're dealing with whether it's opioids or car crash deaths, we know there's extreme urgency to act, and we use the data that we have to take rapid action. Within the Department of Transportation has adopted a goal of eliminating all highway deaths and serious injuries on our roadways. This is a massive undertaking that we're doing in partner with you all and really the rest of the country and the world. Post-crash care is a critical component of the safe system approach. And we do have resources to help power this new approach to how we approach care after a crash. I'm just going to quickly highlight one of them, which is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, which was authorized under the infrastructure law passed 3 years ago. A brand new grant program for local government agencies and metropolitan planning organizations to improve road safety. Several EMS agencies, we're in year 3 of this program now, and several EMS agencies have received awards out of the roughly $3 billion that have been awarded so far. I just put a QR code up there that'll take you directly to the SS4A website. We spend a lot of time just encouraging you all when you're talking to your local EMS agencies to either encourage them to apply for an SS4A grant or to contact a current grantee in their area and get involved in the highway safety planning process. Once a crash happens, the best chance someone has for survival is good post-crash care, as you all know. I'll quickly highlight some of the stats that we now have thanks to NEMSIS and other national data sources. Number one, in 2022, we know that EMS responded to 1.5 million crashes, and of those, 170,000 people were seriously injured. Yet in 2022, of the 42,500 people that died in traffic crashes, 40% of those were still alive on the scene of a crash when EMS arrived on the scene. And the picture certainly isn't any better for children. Over 109,000 crashes involving a child, 10,000 children seriously injured in a crash, and 1,100 children killed in a traffic crash in 2022, of which 55% were still alive when EMS arrived on the scene. I think you all know what the system of care is and the approaches that we have to do to improve care. But I just want to return to one. I'll actually skip the video. Let's talk about blood transfusion. And just to give me a sense, going to get show of hands who has heard about pre-hospital blood transfusion. Okay, good number of hands. So we know through now multiple military and civilian studies that if we can get blood into the vein of an injured patient within 35 minutes of injury, their likelihood of survival increases dramatically, anywhere from 37 to 50%. That, of course, contrasts what we've been doing for the past 50 years, which is mainly crystalloid fluid, which is not only not beneficial, but it's potentially harmful. So what NEMSIS has been able to help us with is specifically looking at the number of crash patients that are in severe or moderate shock following a crash. I always consider moderate shock kind of a misnomer because moderate does not mean it's a good situation at all. It's obviously very bad. But we know after crashes in 2022, there were nearly 69,000 patients in severe or moderate shock that would have benefited from pre-hospital blood transfusion. Here on this map are the 18,039 people that were fatally injured in crashes, but still alive when EMS arrived on the scene. As of April, this shows the current availability of ground-based blood transfusion programs. That number grows every day, but we have a long ways to go to make this intervention available to all the patients that need it. And certainly the same for our pediatric patients, 621 children that were still alive on the scene in 2022, and we know would have benefited from blood. The College of Surgeons, American College of Surgeons, held a press conference just on Monday, highlighting the importance of making pre-hospital blood transfusion available throughout the country. I'm not a statistician, but I'll quote the college's numbers that across all injury mechanisms, they estimate that if blood transfusion was available in every EMS jurisdiction, we would prevent upwards of 60,000 fatal injuries a year, not only among crashes, but that includes obstetric bleeds, shootings, stabbings, anything that makes you lose blood. And I have heard and talked to a number of medics and EMS medical directors that have seen this being carried out in the field. And what I hear time and time again is they compare it to when they have administered blood to unconscious victims. They compare it to giving Narcan to an overdose patient, that they are watching unconscious pre-code patients regain consciousness before they even get to the ER. I live in DC. DC started in January. Is giving about a unit every 24 hours now. And just this week, there was a shooting victim where the medic relayed that exact story, unconscious victim of multiple gunshots who regained consciousness after, I think, 2 units of blood. So the key here is, Nikki Taylor, when she made it to that surgical table, there's a lot of luck working for her. She was 10 minutes from one of the best trauma centers in the country, but she still barely made it. 100 units went into her, and then she still coded on the table. And she's lucky to be here. What would have happened now if hopefully at that same intersection, someone in a crash, far less blood can go into them, and they can get to that surgeon in a much more viable state. I was trying to withhold my passion for this topic, but I think I'm reflecting what I'm hearing from folks across the country and folks who've been in the field longer than I've been alive, who are saying that they have never seen an intervention of this level of impact in their lifetimes. So your role as data managers, the military medical system learned, their joint trauma system learned during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that communication of the data that they were seeing on the medical side and in combat, and even in the folks that were designing their vehicles and body armor, that exchange of data across that entire spectrum of care saved upwards of 2,000, prevented upwards of 2,000 warfighters from dying. And data was the glue that held that entire system together and made it happen and led them to the insights about blood. So I have no doubt, and I know there's been discussions going on about this week, the importance of data about blood transfusion and about what's happening to these injured patients in the field is really critical. And I think we have an opportunity to really transform what we're doing when it comes to the care of injured patients. So that's my charge to you. And my second charge, the second takeaway is we need a lot of blood in our blood supply to make this happen. So go donate blood and encourage your colleagues to donate blood. So thank you.
Questions for Jim?
Hi, thank you. So how long has this been in play, and what are the limitations to trying to get this rolled out to every state? I still work in the field as a paramedic and just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And first I've really heard about it, honestly. So the numbers are staggering. If you're saying 60,000, I think about, and is there any data from any of the mass shootings that have happened that Nevada and others had the blood there and it saved patients, or none of them had it?
So as far as like preventable mortality studies specific to those instances, I don't know. I do know that in the Uvalde shooting, there was a lot of pre-hospital blood that was administered that, you know, that obviously would have benefited those patients. The barriers, you know, the programs that I've talked to that you see around the country, you know, they are agencies, their leadership has been very aggressive about this once they saw the data and the outcomes. What they have spent most of their time doing is working out agreements with their blood suppliers. That can be a 2 to 3 year process. You know, the blood suppliers, the major blood suppliers in the US, including the Red Cross, are working on this issue, but it still takes time. And just that steadfast commitment to develop those relationships and to get to the point of deployment.
Hey there, Leetta here again. And I have a practical question. I know we're talking about data. So at the break, if anyone has any information, I asked my chief, what's the biggest headache about getting our blood program started? And he said storage, temperature tracking, and the recirculation process of blood between the field and the hospital. So that's not strictly data. So at the break or lunch, if anyone has any insights for me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and I encourage folks, there's a website for the Prehospital Blood Transfusion Initiative Coalition. I think it's phbtic.org, which does have a lot of information resources on blood transfusion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gavin Sussman with the Texas EMS Registry. So you'll see that we have a lot of counties on there that are actively giving whole blood. From a lot of them that I've talked to, I think there's been a lot of close collaboration with the level 1 trauma centers, making sure that they can rotate the blood accurately and make sure that they're minimizing the waste. So I think that it really starts with the local EMS agency, the local hospital, but then also rotating the blood to make sure that it doesn't get wasted if it's not being utilized. Something else that we learned from Uvalde is using air medical for blood delivery is also super viable. Our goal is to be able to deliver 20 units of whole blood anywhere in the state within 40 minutes within the next 2 years. So I think definitely you need local partnerships. But even in that panhandle area, we don't even have any level 1 trauma centers. So even with level 2s, it's certainly possible. So thank you for this presentation.
Thanks. Gam, first of all, thank you for your emotion. This is obviously a very emotional topic. Perfect to touch on after Gavin's question. So he mentions the ecosystem of partners, the blood bank community, which I actually learned about from someone in Texas. Didn't even know there was a blood bank community. They are starting to buzz about the type O blood shortage. So the thing that keeps biting at me is this idea that this is a fairly new practice here in civilian environment. In the military, there is blood typing, right? I recently posted online a picture of my own dog tag. I apparently have type A negative blood. The military knows this. It was on my tag. So recently, a physician in Portland, Oregon, went on record talking about disaster response, which obviously involves a lot of people in this room, and the concerns about what happens if the type O blood supply locally or regionally is drained. And so all that's left is the non-universal blood, which to me was a fascinating question in light of the previous discussions of TEFCA, where it turns out that one of the data elements, actually several of the data elements in the US core data set for interoperability, which sort of sits behind TEFCA, right, are pertaining to blood type. So to the degree that we start talking about administering appropriate care to the patient in the field, why are we not talking about type specific blood? And every time I've raised this, I'm a non-clinician. If anyone didn't know that already, I'm a technologist, not a clinician. So I get reamed for this by people who say, where are you going to put it in the field and how are you going to type them and so on? But the military already does them. And so to the degree that you have individuals with hemophilia or other special blood issues or have a known blood type, and you're talking, like Gavin said, about air delivery, for example, of blood by drone, which I know you guys are very, supportive of or experimenting with and so on, shouldn't we be talking about something other than type O low titer blood delivery and instead say, we leave that for the patients who we have no idea about? But if you've got a community like Portland gets slammed by an earthquake and runs out or risks running out of blood, shouldn't we be giving the folks with type A, type B, type AB that blood first and save the precious O blood that is nationally being talked about as being in short supply? And to me, again, it sort of suggests that the HIE and TEFCA conversation and the EMS blood delivery conversation are bumping into each other, but running into this question of how do the clinicians in the field access that information? But if we popped a hole between them, wouldn't that be useful for folks to be able to say, you know your blood type, let me give you the more specific one, instead of just giving you a generic sort of catch-all approach? I'd love your thoughts on this. It's been bugging me for months.
Yeah. Well, let me actually ask a question, because I was talking to a colleague this morning who her driver's license had her blood type. You hear me?
No. Okay. I was talking to a colleague this morning who mentioned that her Virginia driver's license had her blood type on it. I work in the Department of Transportation. I should know why, but I don't know the history behind why that is. Obviously, organ donor is common, and there is some history there. But I'll just query the crowd right now. Let's do a live poll. If folks have your driver's license, I'd just be curious to see who has their blood type on their driver's license. Does anyone have their blood type on their driver's license? I don't know why Virginia's doing it, but it's a question worth exploring because, yeah, someone is collecting that data. As far as figuring out deployment during a large scale disaster, I know folks like Asper, the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response, are certainly trying to tackle that question. I think we know that disasters blood is going to be important, but beyond that, I don't have an answer, John.
One of the most interesting things that I saw come out of NHTSA that doesn't get enough play, but should, is that in 2009, there was a published study about the medical contributors to car crashes. Right, there are well-documented figures around the percentage of car crashes that occur within 20 miles or so of one's home. Right, and then in this study that NHTSA published, but doesn't broadcast, I actually think it would be interesting to everyone in here, looks at the rates of diabetes and stroke and loss of consciousness is actually one that's specifically called out that contribute to car crashes. So whether it's a matter of fast availability on a license or some other mechanism of querying. And if you know that, for example, 50% of car crashes happen within 20 miles of home, today, most people's health information sits in some version of a health information exchange, right? So what if we shift the frame a little bit on the question and say, how can we better identify the individuals who are involved in the crash? So if you have somebody with an underlying health issue or an allergy or a special blood type, whatever, we know that. And I feel like you get to the same end, right? This question of EMS accessing data and using data and so on, but it presents such an acute use case where people are talking about whole blood anyway. So to the degree of saying not just whole blood, but the right whole blood, and knowing that the patient is hemophiliac, so you don't just go jabbing them in the arm, but you make sure you got the clotting factors so you don't make things worse. Doesn't that make people care? And I just got here today, not yesterday. So there's a conversation on how do you get to care about the data. But this seems like a perfect nexus to bring all the threads together around what if you knew that patient's needs and could access it and had the quality of data to query it. All of a sudden, you solve this in the case of something people seem really passionate about deploying in their agencies today.
Okay, so again, let me stop there because we need to move ahead. We're moving ahead with blood and blood program documentation. So we're taking this to the next step. Let me introduce our speakers to Jeremy Kinsman, who is my colleague and partner in crime in the NHTSA Office of EMS for all things NEMSIS. If you're working on research and you're doing the analytics side of the house, you're most likely working with Jeremy. You're certainly not working with me on that part of this project. So Jeremy and then Randall Eimerman. Randall is the NASEMSO representative to our NEMSIS project. NEMSIS is actually has a contract with NASEMSO so that we have a liaison within NASEMSO that bridges the medical directors and the state directors and the data managers with all of the efforts at NEMSIS. And Randall has been that person now for what, 2 years? And we're very happy to have him. So with that, Jeremy.
All right. Thanks, Eric. I'll try to go quick. There's really, I think, two things that Randall and I were hoping to cover. And if we run out of time, I think it'll be great to just kind of continue the discussion with you all over the next couple of days and on meetings and via email. Essentially, what I'm going to run through is, so the first thing we kind of want to look at is we feel like we've got an undercount of the number of cases of pre-hospital blood transfusion in the National EMS database. So we're going to run through just a series of slides that are looking at what are the potential problems or why that might be occurring, some like ways we might assess that, and then some potential solutions. And then Randall's going to come up and he's going to lead a discussion around, you know, in addition to documenting blood transfusion in e-procedures and e-medications, are there additional data elements that we need to add to the NEMSIS data standard, or are there additional data elements that need to just become part of a maybe national custom element? So we're going to try and at least set up those two issues so that we can continue discussing them over the next couple of days. So I'm going to repeat a couple slides here that Gam had at the end of his presentation. So the presentation that Gam just gave, we've been giving a presentation similar to that to our leadership at NHTSA and to partners across the federal government. And so we've kind of gotten them excited about the potential that pre-hospital blood has to saving lives. So we've been showing them, you know, this map and showing like, these are the patients that ultimately died within 30 days that were involved in a motor vehicle crash, but were alive when first responders got to the scene. Can we save all of these lives? No, but we can save, based on the research literature, we feel like we can save a good proportion of these lives. This is just 2022 here, the blood programs that were active during that time. So not showing the expansion into 2024, which there was about a 30% increase. But this is a map that we're showing our leadership. And so they're saying we don't have pre-hospital blood programs in LA, San Francisco, at least in 2022, right? Salt Lake City, Denver, Chicago, Detroit, all along Long Island. And so that's had a powerful impact on them. And so they followed up with, you know, they've been proponents. So this is our deputy administrator, Sophie Schulman, and she attended our post-crash care summit in August. And you can see from her quote here that she's been a big proponent of expanding these programs across the country. one of the things they've been asking us, though, is for some more evidence from our FARS data and from our NEMSIS data about what we're seeing and, in terms of lives saved and in terms of patients impacted. And so we've been able to do a little bit with our FARS data. Those are traffic crashes that involved a vehicle was on a public road where someone died within 30 days. And we've been able to look at the 24-hour mortality rate for those patients if the crash occurred in a county where a pre-hospital blood program occurred compared to a county where they did not have a pre-hospital blood program. And so we've been able to show some effect there. If you crashed in a county where there was a pre-hospital blood program, we're seeing a little bit of improvement in that 24-hour mortality rate, but that's only for patients that died. So that's not really telling us about, the patients that ultimately survived. And so that's where they started asking us questions. Well, what is your NEMSIS data showing you for those counties? And unfortunately, we've run into some problems. So we're aware of the programs, we're aware of the counties where those programs existed, and we're aware of the number of patients that have received blood, either through the research literature or trade journals or media reports or one-on-one conversations with medical directors or paramedics who are overseeing those programs in those counties. And so, for example, we talked to someone who's overseeing a program in Texas, and they told us, well, we had 150 blood transfusions, patients that received blood in 2023. And our NEMSIS data, we're showing at the national level much lower counts. And so we're trying to figure out, why is that the case? I think for folks who aren't aware, back in our 2022 data that we had at the national level was mostly based on version 3.4 data, where you could only document a blood transfusion in the e-procedure section. We have since made a change. The NEMSIS TAC has made a change so that can now be documented in the e-medication section. Why did we do that? Well, it allows you to document some corresponding information about the blood. You can document the route where it was administered, the dosage units, the response to that medication, and any complications. You wouldn't be able to do that in the e-procedure section. So I'm going to run through just kind of like 5 different sources of potential error for why we feel like we have an undercount at the national level. One, just kind of on EMS clinician agency documentation practice, local EMS agency like EPCR customization, any issues with versioning, potentially some sources of the problem in our state EMS state data repositories, and then there could be some issues just at the national level with the National EMS database. So in terms of clinician and agency documentation practice, some of the things that we've thought of about why this might be occurring, why do we have this undercount? It could be because in the counties where this is being transfused, it's just common practice for the EMT or paramedic. They may just document in the narrative. Maybe they're not using the structured fields. That could be a potential source of the problem. We know some of the programs are using separate documentation. They might be using a separate written form. We heard from some programs that they're using Epic. So that's another source of the problem. And the other thing might be if we don't have the incident location documented by the EMT or paramedic, it's a challenge for us to identify the zip code or the county. So that could also be a source of the problem. So what are some ways that we might assess this? We've talked to some of the vendors about maybe doing some keyword searches of their narrative to see, do you have cases where it's only being documented in the narrative and not in the structured fields? We could do some surveys of agencies, asking them about, how they're doing this documentation practice. And then I think at the NEMSIS TAC, we could just look at, for all of the records where we do have blood transfusion documented, how many of those do we have the zip code or county missing? Some additional challenges at the local EMS agency related to like EPCR customization. It's been great. We talked to a couple of vendors yesterday who are going to help us assess and kind of see what solutions we have for this problem. But if these local EMS agencies are using like a separate worksheet or a separate module where they don't map to the structured fields that we're collecting at the national level, we're not going to have that information. So that's another potential source. For EPCR versioning, if someone at the local agency level hasn't yet transitioned to a version 3.5 product, they're not going to be able to document a blood transfusion SNOMED CT code in the eMed section. So that's another potential source of the problem. For our state EMS data repositories, They haven't yet transitioned to version 3.5, even though their agencies have. They may not be able to collect and identify those cases where the EMT or paramedic has documented the blood transfusion under eMeds. There might also just be an issue where those records just aren't making it to us. Are they being transmitted to the state repository and they're not meeting the state rules? And so they're not being transmitted up to us at the national level. That's another potential source of the problem. So some other things that we could work together to try and assess and solve some of those issues. And then the last piece here is just making sure at the national level, perhaps we are receiving all these records. They have been documented in one of the structured fields, and just the infrastructure of the National EMS database or the repository they have at the national level, is there something going on there where we're not able to identify these records? And so that's something that Clay and the team at the NEMSIS TAC is working on as well. So, and then also there are some additional blood transfusion SNOMED CT codes that aren't currently in the defined list. So reviewing that list, and that's some of the work that Randall has been doing with the DMC on reviewing that list, figuring out if there's additional codes that we need to add there. And I think we'll transition to Randall. So I'll stop there. I don't know how much time I have, or we have 15 minutes. So I'll just stop there. Does that make sense to folks? Is there anything that you feel like we're missing or that's there that shouldn't be there? Are you open to kind of helping us figure out this problem? Because I think ultimately when our leadership at NHTSA comes to us and says, well, tell us where these pre-hospital blood transfusions are occurring, how many are occurring for motor vehicle crash patients. And we don't want to say to them, sorry, we can't tell you that. And so we're hoping you can help us figure out this issue, because what we don't want to happen is we don't have the data to support expansion of these programs across the country because we have an issue with the data. So
we'll just transition to Randall then, and we'll go to questions. All
right, thank you, Jeremy. So from the data manager side, Amber Vietanen is our data manager chair. We've really been focusing on this blood product documentation. One of the biggest things for us to be changing over is from the documentation of 3.4 version over to version 3.5. Jeremy's mentioned a bunch of times that you can only document that as a procedure. And now as we've kind of moved over, we've noticed some new medications or some blood products that are ending up in the medication field. Amber, you may be able to speak to this best, but we kind of put a little guide together, and what we can try to consider as our best practices guide to sort of help educate our EMS clinicians on the new possibilities with version 3.5. This will involve a little bit of a procedure and adding some of these medications to the defined list. The data managers did do a poll and a survey to kind of discover what medications are we missing or blood products that we're missing, different procedures that are being used. And we think we got a lot of great data to be able to move forward. So kind of speaking on that, we were kind of looking for a lot of vendor involvement, and our data managers have been super involved in this. We've been working with NEMSIS just to make sure that we're moving forward in the correct path. So Amber, if you wanted to speak more to that, I can as well. But Amber did a great job of kind of putting this form together for everybody. And like I said, we're looking for some opinions and maybe some disagreements, or do we all agree that we're moving correctly in the right direction?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to Randall, who I think sent an email out that has this document. We tried to just put all of our thoughts into one page. And ideally, we'd like to walk away from this meeting with a recommendation that we can all get behind. This is the right way to capture blood product administration in the field. Since it's all over the board across states, we need one direction to move forward so we can all be calculating it the same way. We can provide reliable numbers to the federal government and be able to all access some of the, millions of dollars of grant funds that are out there. So our proposal from the DMC is to actually ask agencies to document a generic blood product administration code in the procedures field, followed by the specific type of product that was given in the medications field. So that means that there would be a code available in both of those data elements. And then the corresponding required fields in the medication section of how much was given, some of those more specific pieces that can be captured in meds over procedures, So we don't have to create a bajillion custom data elements, only like 10 or whatever. Just kidding. No custom data elements, but some probably. So we want to open the conversation with this group here. First of all, about that proposal, any major technical reservations about the requirements in both fields. Would love to hear from vendors since we've already had some of these conversations with the DMC. And then some more specific potential conversations about how to reduce the duplication between e-procedures and e-medications for potentially the same procedure. So I think open it up. Keenan has thoughts.
Keenan from Zoll. A few years ago, we specifically moved those RX norm codes to be allowed within this e-procedures group. No, the other way around. Those SNOMED codes to be allowed in the e-medications group. What's the logic behind now needing to do a procedure and a medication?
We made it up. No, so I think it was flexibility, right? So if you look at the data, most of it's being documented as a procedure. All those, like you said, Keenan, all those have been adjusted to be available in the medications. The reality of it is that there's just not consistency across the country in how it's documented. And today, the NEMSIS standard allows it to be documented, at least the documentation of it in a way that we can actually get those numbers and then improve from there. So I don't think that DMC in our meetings would be opposed if it was, okay, don't do the procedure, but just document it all in the medications. I think that's just, as we discussed the various ways to do it, that was just one of the thoughts, was just do a generic transfusion of blood administration, for instance, is the procedure, and then the actual type, whether like it was whole blood or whether you gave fresh frozen plasma or whatever else, would actually be documented in the medication. That way you could pull data either on the specific stuff that was done or just a generic, like how often is the transfusion of blood been done? Blood products at least. So was some of our conversation, but I don't know that anybody's opposed to, if it was just put it all in medications and that's it, let's just do that. That would be fine too.
I think there are some significant technical barriers in the current state to be able to report on blood products just using the e-medication fields. So having it in both fields allows for immediate reconciliation of some of those issues. So we can start to report today on blood product administrations.
While she's thinking about the rectifying the issue parts, I did want to say that the other major piece that's found in this, while we're talking about procedures and medications, it's the number of agencies that aren't even using either of those to document blood administration. It's the stuff that's being put into narratives. And we're seeing that in a lot of the documentation coming through in some of the states, especially on interfacility transfers. And so that's another piece that needs to be addressed, is that if you're administering it and you're taking over as the EMS crew, it doesn't benefit any of us that it's in the narrative because we can't pull the data on that. It still needs to be documented in one of those appropriate places.
I think Chip had his hand raised.
So just a couple things I'm trying to dredge up my memory. Some of the reason I think we wanted to keep it procedures in meds is we already have a lot of folks that are, they're used to doing it in procedures. We've kind of got this transition from 3.4 to 3.5 where it was in procedures. Not everyone, not all the vendors added in some of those ARCS norm codes so that you could do it in both places. We wanted it, and we didn't want to short circuit somebody that's actually documenting now. We wanted to capture that. So we wanted to be able to do it in two places. On another level, you think about blood transfusion is not like giving a medication. There's a whole procedure. There's a lot of steps involved with that. So it really is a procedure. And then the medications allowed us to be more specific about the products that were being delivered during the process. So that's my memory. So I don't know if that helps with kind of that discussion too.
So when a program is getting started, that they've some level of government has decided that they're going to do this blood products thing. Is there some kind of onboarding process that seems like where we want to find how they're going to document it and maybe train them to say that, we are aware that these codes exist and we are using this system on this version, be it 3.5, 3.4, Epic, something else. That seems like the place to address some of those challenges that on the earlier slide. Is there any kind of space in there to say, here's your onboarding training for how we need you to document?
Absolutely. So let me, we're at time on this topic, but it's not going to be the last time this topic comes up. Let me bring this full circle to the overall program request. So pre-hospital blood across the United States is growing and it's going to grow very quickly. And there's a lot of funding that was timely that's available to help that happen. So what we're doing today has to happen faster than probably we would do if we were adding any other medication. We have a history of doing this, but we've had a history of doing it different ways throughout the United States, primarily because this was one of those things that wasn't mainstream. So people created a documentation standard or a way to do it within their particular agency or within their particular software. Now the challenge is to put the genie back in the bottle and standardize it. So what we're going to do, which is exactly what I think you're asking, David, is we have to come up with a way to do it. That's what Amber's proposing. Amber's saying, look, we've documented in the past as a med, or we've documented in the past as a procedure. Now we're going to look at doing it as a med. We have the opportunity to collect it in both formats. We have people on 3.4 going to 3.5. We have some people at 3.5 and 3.5.1. All that may make a difference in your particular software product and how you do it. But the bottom line is we have the Pre-Hospital Blood Coalition and other organizations saying, here's what a blood program looks like. If you're going to implement it, here's some of the things you need to consider. That's everything from the procedure to the warmers, the whole process. That's the educational piece. All we're looking at is, how are we going to document it? What data do we need to support it? And then let's think about what Megan said earlier today. What's the story we want to tell? How many times we do it? What type of blood? What products we're using? What's important to capture? That's my task. That was my task to the advisory board yesterday. That's my conversation with the leadership at NASEMSO, with the Pre-Hospital Blood Coalition. And the timeline is to have it implemented by January 1st. Because 8 months from now, the money to make this happen will probably not be there and may have gone away. So this is an example of where we have to become more agile as the environment makes opportunities available to us. This isn't something completely out of the norm of what we do. We should be able to make this happen. And this is a case where I have to rely heavily on the vendors to work with each other to come up with a standard. And I think Amber has proposed a pretty good idea. It's just a matter of, will it work across the vendors? So use this time this afternoon, use some of your time this evening. By all means, discuss it. We'll have other conversations here this week. And let me know what the challenges are. And let's see if we can't overcome them as a group to get the standard written and developed and out there. But this is not going to be something that we're going to have 6-8 months to discuss and kick back and forth. All right. With that, I think, Chris, we're at a point for a break. Is there a prize wheel before the break? Prize wheel after the break. So take your break, be back, and don't forget to be back on time, or you missed the prize wheel. You have 10 minutes. Introductions for our next speakers is quite the privilege. So all of you, I'm sure at some point have had some sort of interaction with Dr. Clay Mann from the University of Utah, who's held this position as principal investigator now at the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center for many years. Clay is probably one of the hardest working contractors I've ever had a privilege to work with in the federal government. He's probably the only person I email at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, other than the other speaker for this particular session that emails me back. So Clay will be presenting today with Jay Ostby who was the state or is the state data manager from Wyoming. And Jay is another person who he and I routinely email each other late in the evenings, asking questions about NEMSIS and sharing information and trying to move things forward. Also, Jay has just been replaced not too long ago by Amber as the lead for the data managers for NASEMSO. So Jay and Clay will be talking about the UUID before lunch. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't know if accepting phone calls from Eric at midnight is an accolade, but yes, I do accept the phone calls. So yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks again for everyone who's joined us for these couple of days. This will be a few days of some great information. One of the things we want to cover before lunch is this idea of the extension of the UUID. So I'm going to introduce it a little bit. Some of you are incredibly familiar with it, so just bear with me for a couple of minutes. This speaks to a lot of the discussions we've had today. Megan's talk, Rachel's talk, some of the stuff that GAM shared. So this is an avenue that's also gaining real popularity among federal sources and will probably lead to some funding. So let's talk about this. All right, so just real quick, I'm going to introduce folks to the UUID for those who are seeing it for the first time. We have a lot of folks who want to make sure that they kind of understand it. So literally NEMSIS. Okay, great. Yeah, so folks are familiar with the model that we have for the exchange of data, right? So the EPCR is completed, that data is sent to the state, and the national elements come to the national repository. Clearly, states want that data in the state database, and we do as well, as soon as possible. So often EMS professionals will send the record as soon as they're leaving from the scene or as soon as they arrive at the hospital. All those records may not be complete at that time. They may have picked up an unconscious patient and they need to be able to have some way to update that record right in the state repository and to have that updated record come to the national level. So that was problematic under version 2, right? Where we had to use this weird hash where we brought together all these elements that were present in a record, kind of queued them all together and said, that's kind of a unique ID associated with that record. So use that to replace the old record and give the new one. Version 3 adds the UUID, the Universal Unique ID. Basically, every single installation of a NEMSIS project has a built-in random number generator. There's an example, the number on the bottom. It is so complex and so long that the possibility of 2 independent random number generators ever generating the same number, having a number collision, you're much more likely to win Powerball, right? So the system works for us. So it allows us to have this process where every single installation can resend a record back to the state as often as they want. That UUID is used to remove the old record and replace it with the new. All right, so as GAM was talking about, the National Academies of Science, this was the document he was talking about that NHTSA has tried to really initiate the recommendations that came out of that meeting and that study. One of the recommendations, to read this carefully, one of the recommendations is that the American College of Surgeons, NHTSA, and NASEMSO should work jointly to develop patient-level linkages across the national EMS database and the national trauma data bank. Both of those are de-identified data sets. You couldn't link those if you wanted to, right? They're made so they can't be linked. That's why they're de-identified. They're completely siloed. But NHTSA initiated a project to see if we could make this happen. There were some meetings that were held in Chicago at the American College of Surgeons. NEMSIS was invited. We came and said, wow, well, maybe we could use this UUID. Maybe somehow we could implement this UUID. And that's where this idea opened up of, you've seen this diagram before, right? Of a actual trauma registrar who has access to the EMS record and the hospital record to complete the trauma registry record. If they had access to those 2 records and could uniquely identify a patient, that UUID could flow over into that trauma registry record. Now, at the state level, UUIDs present and at the national level. So now, even though there's de-identified data sets that are sent to both of those data sets, there's a way to link them without name, without social security number, without address, without any of those elements. So that's what we've been proposing. So we've our next step, now that 3.5 is out and the UUID is available, we decided to test this. And so Jay and I are going to talk about a test that we did. So we're going to first talk about what we've done in regards to a test to see if this works. What's in the square? Can we make that work? So we contacted the American College of Surgeons and said, go into your National Trauma Data Bank. A NEMSIS version 3.5 has been available for a while now. Let's look in and see how many you have. So they made a placeholder for it. So they should be collecting it. So we looked through all states, and the ACS asked me to blind all states. And for 2022, how many UUIDs did we have? Very few. And in 2023, we asked them in April of 2024 to send us this data. How many you have by state? How many of your trauma registry records have a UUID, a NEMSIS UUID? Overall, it was 0.5%. But there was this one funny state that seemed to have really made the effort to make the UUID work, and that was Wyoming. So Chris and I, who you met just a moment ago, we got reservations at a haunted hotel, some strange place in Wyoming. They have 2 level 2 trauma centers in Wyoming. And we said, wow, how are you making this work? How are you making that red square work? You've got UUIDs in almost every single trauma registry record that's going to the American College of Surgeons. So we went to these 2 hospitals. We met with some wonderful people. They're using the image trend product, but other products allow this to happen as well. But here's how the magic happens. So the trauma registrar sits down. She's got 2 screens. Image Trend has a product called Hospital Hub. Is that correct? Called Hospital Hub, where she can see the Epic record or the EMS record and the Epic record. She can kind of review those. She uses the product to say, hey, I think these 2 are the same person. And now this is an example. This isn't a true patient. And true to Jay, you'll notice he named this person Chris P. Bacon. We have all had to put up with Jay for many years, so we're familiar with that. But you can see now the registrar, here's the EMS data. Here's the patient registries data, the Epic record from the hospital. And the registrar says, oh, wow, here's Chris P. Bacon. And yes, this is the same patient in both of these data sets. She presses what they call the blue man. She calls it the blue man, presses the blue man, and the UUID goes directly over to that record. Now the UUID exists in the record. It goes up to the state, goes to the ACS, goes to NEMSIS, and they're linked. So was this working? Did it work? So we went there, we pulled their data for 2023. There were 11,600 EMS transports to the hospital. 1,306 were for trauma. 963 had a UUID. Why not all of them? Because there were still some 3-4 records, I think, that were happening, Jay. That's what I would guess. On the NEMSIS side, we looked at all the NEMSIS records, so that's more than just trauma. This is just trauma, of course. And there were 10,706 that had that had an EMS record, right? So there's probably some different type of transports. These were just scene transports. So we took that 963 and the trauma registrar had those number of records. We had 619 matches between this 963. Now, we're not sure why there wasn't complete matching. We're still working to kind of figure that out. But when we set up this study, we had to be true to the nature of the study. So we have de-identified data on either side. So it's hard for us to look at the data and determine, like, were these the same names? Why did they not link? So we're still working on that, and we'll make some progress there. But clearly, completely de-identified data sets were linked. Now, can we find them? Can we find them in these two registries now with completely de-identified data? So yeah, so were these actually true matches? So you can take a look at these charts. We have a waterfall chart and then just a regular chart, right, for how much was a match or not a match. This is kind of hard to see. So among the records that we matched just with the UUID, you know, did they agree on the sex of the patient? You can see was just a little bit of a difference, but very, very close. We could look at race because that was present in both data sets. Take a look at the waterfall chart. You can see a lot of what EMS marks as unknown is more clearly delineated in hospital data. But again, I think very, very good matching, and probably the best value that we could match was age. And I mean, it seemed very successful, right? So I think we did a good job of matching. There's a couple of those, right? But you can clearly understand that, right? EMS, how many times have you been on a call and someone says, I'm a month away from being 43. Well, do you report 42 or 43, right? So there's going to be a little bit of issue there, but clearly the matching, this idea works, right? So I think there's great interest in what we can accomplish with extending UUIDs. And in the interest of time, because I want to have time for us to discuss a couple of issues, I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Jay, if you want to come up. And maybe, Jay, you can start with this slide, right after this slide or your slides. But I think you could talk about why you think this was successful in your state.
A lot of work went in behind the scenes. And I also got to say, a lot of thank you to the vendor for working with ImageTrend on this, that we actually wrote into the RFP. And I'm going to say this was back in 2008, 2009 that we wrote into the RFP. We want these two products to talk. We want to be able to communicate back and forth between our trauma registry and EMS data linkage. It took us a little while to get it going, but it was really a good plan on there. That user-friendly UUID exchange with the trauma registrars. I spent, I don't know how many months working trying to figure out, where's this at? Where's this going? And the trauma registrars, they kept going, oh, we've had this for years. We've had this for years. And I finally nailed it down. They were using eRecord01, if you know what that one is. It's just a unique number out there. Kind of like, no, that's not the UUID. You can't see it in the background. But I showed them how they could view it using the report writer on there, just on that. Yeah, it does help. We have the same software vendor around. However, I've been working with ImageTrend, and I'm speaking ahead of them that they are working on putting the UUID in the header of the PDFs for the future. Just like in Wyoming, we're integrating EMS records into hospital records using medical record number and encounter number. So that's one way to do it. We've had some motivated trauma centers out there. They have just been fabulous on doing that on there. However, I talked to Clay, and I wanted to talk to you. We have a new UUID project that we're working on, and I just want to introduce that just real briefly. Now, here's the one caveat I got to tell you about this. We just put the draft together. This is totally subject to change. Anything can derail, anything can go wrong, and that's the way it is. We're looking at crash records integration with the EMS. It's a 2 to 4 year plan. Now, I put the face palm up there because I looked at that. 2 to 4 years. I mean, we are so close to doing it right now. Why do we have 2 to 4 years? It's because that's what our highway department likes to put in their plans to submit the NHTSA on that. But it is kind of thing. Now, many of you have heard this, why we want to integrate. Now, we've heard of the 5 E's out there, just a little bit on that. We have the engineering, education, and enforcement. I talked a little bit about that, and I'm going to use the F word. When those fail, who picks up the rest? EMS picks that up. They've got to do that, emergency medical services. And the fifth E that's being discussed out there is emerging technologies. And this is where we're trying to go to in this project, just a little bit on that. All right, we're trying to figure out what is the common connection. And how many of you use the same software for law enforcement, emergency medical services, fire services, all that? No, fire's got NIFRS, and then they got NERS, EMS has NEMSIS. Law enforcement, I don't even know what they have out there and some of their things, some of the proprietary stuff out there. Does any of them talk back and forth? Not really. How do we do this? However, we have found a common denominator. There's this thing, you're going to love this name. It is called Wiggles in Wyoming. And really, it's the Wyoming Incident Geolocation Services. Okay, here's what happens on this. The law enforcement officer is required to use Wiggles to identify the location of the crash on there. It's a commonality when we do that. Officers cannot submit a crash record without utilizing this system. And it is very robust at mapping locations. One of the problems that we have, how many of you ever mapped your locations of crashes or incidents in your EMS systems? I love it. It is just absolutely hilarious. One day I had an incident in Singapore. That's a long ways from Wyoming out there. How did it do that? I have no idea. But, all right, here's what Wiggles looks like. And I got this courtesy of, it's called ITIS-Corp. And I do want to tell you, if you want more information, talk to Robert in Hawaii. He's using the same system a little bit. So we're both on the same things. Those little white things on there, that's semis on there. Here's the advantage of that. You can narrow that down to the exact point of the curve, the location of it. Was it out in the field? Was it not? This system will give you the exact location of a crash accident. Then the system also comes up and it gives you, it gives you a standardized, how do you write mile marker in? How do you transfer this stuff over there? So we're going to be able to put this as our plan in the EMS record on that. The things that it currently does, okay, the location type of the crash, was it on the roadway, the intersection, the alley, off-road? So it really defines this darn good. It gives you latitude, longitude, gives you the county in there, gives you a lot of information. Our point is we're going to be able to try to pull that into our EMS record on there. And then we have accurate pinpoints of the vehicles. And, one might ask, what happens if there's two vehicles? Well, you just have another location, vehicle 1, vehicle 2 on that. There are some technical hurdles that we do have to go over just a little bit. Yeah, and we are looking. We'll look at integrating Wiggles into our EMS crash records. And we're going to be looking at taking the UUID, sending it from our EMS record into the crash system, crash identification system. So what will happen? We'll have the age, sex, or gender, whatever it might be, come back over. And then the law enforcement, they'll have the UUID to match up to the victims that they document in their system on there, on that. Transferring that UUID back and forth Wiggles, they already have to fill it out Wiggles. Wiggles transmit the information to the crash record system. So if it works, we'll have the UUID populating into the crash system and moving that over into the integration of that. We think it's going to be a really cool project. And when does it all happen? It counts on EMS coming up this. What are we looking at? I talked to, the other day, and I didn't put up a slide for this. It's this. What are we going to transfer over? What's the data elements? What's the NEMSIS values we're looking at? But let me just give you just a really easy example. We have 2 locations. One location has 20 accidents on it. One location has 5 accidents at it. This 20 accident location has 3 records where the patients were listed as a high acuity level. Okay, 3 out of 20. Now we have this other place. We have 3 patients that have a high acuity level in this location too. would there be more interest in trying to figure out what's happening with this location where we're having more injuries overall? I don't know. Yeah. Have we got to there? I don't know. It's interesting. But, oh, by the way, Wiggles does do the grade of the curve, the size of the shoulder, where the rumble bar is present. Just a lot of different components in that. So I think it's going to be a pretty robust system once we get kind of going off on that. I did tell Clay I wanted to hijack just for a minute on post-crash care highway safety funds. However, a number of you have talked to me about discussion on this. Clay advises me that Friday, there's going to be a discussion on some of the things that we might be able to do on that. And some of you are getting excellent funds from your highway safety. Some of you are not. We really want to come up with a plan. How can we support GAM, Eric, and Jeremy, and Clay, and also get funding for us to take care of crashes on that? Oops.
Hey, great.
Just
Yeah.
an edit slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. So stay here if you would. That's a great presentation. Thank you. So I think what we're trying to portray to you here is if we can, this process of moving the UUID into terminal data sets is one way of us being able to improve the ability for us to link together records that ensure that privacy is considered, the security is considered, but the terminal data set could be maintained by CDC. It could be FARS at NHTSA. It could be state level data sets. But the movement of this UUID, I think, into those data sets is great. It is gaining great kind of interest. The CDC is planning to fund several of U states in the near future with projects to see if we can move the UUID into the EHR of specific hospitals or into IHEs that are maintained within states. So there's real interest in allowing this mechanism to bring together data from two data sets that perhaps weren't meant to be linked or have reasons why they can't be brought together. And this can do it in a de-identified way. So I'd love to open it up. We noticed right there that clearly many states have, for example, for trauma patients have not been able to send their UUID up to the American College of Surgeons. That's probably because it's not being collected at the hospital level. We'd like to hear if there are barriers that we can work on, either on the vendor side or on the state side at the NEMSIS TAC, that would help to facilitate the movement of this important number. Comments?
Hi, Matt Blackburn from the Mass DPH again. I just had a question about the UUID, and I know it's relatively new and we are collecting it now, and I believe all of our records, because I think almost everyone is over on 3.5 in Massachusetts. The UUID is specific to the incident, right? But not a patient. So is that right?
Yeah. So there's many UUIDs within a single NEMSIS record. Some identify subsets of data, but there is a UUID that's associated with that record. Okay. So it would be for that patient.
So if you had a patient hypothetically who was involved in an EMS encounter, was brought to a hospital and admitted 1 month, and then 3 months later had another EMS encounter and went back to the same hospital, it would be a different UUID for even if they were both traumatic events, hypothetically.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's correct. It's a record identifier, not a patient identifier. That's correct. Yes.
I had a question, Jay. So are you guys just using the UUID of the transporting unit? Because since it's record level and each unit is filling out a record, we sometimes have 3 UUIDs for a patient. So would it just be the one that's transported the patient to a hospital?
Yeah, Jay, do you know what you're doing? I can tell you that the American College of Surgeons, the NTDB, it's a 1 to N. element, so you can include multiple UUIDs. But do you know which one they're collecting? Is it the final unit transporting the patient to the hospital?
The final unit ID, the UUID for that specific record is what's being collected. And that's what's being
Let's say
sent.
the patient is in the field, has a record by the first responders, ambulance arrived, now there's another record.
Yeah, so for
Okay,
example,
yeah.
we'd have like a paramedic engine show up, then we have an ambulance who might be transporting, or we have a medic and then an ambulance who's transporting show up. So
We
it
have-
would just be the one that's transporting that you would
Okay.
include?
Yeah, pretty much it's only at this time, the transporting unit is sending that over. We do have a lot of fire non-transporting agencies, and there is a UUID inside that record. At this time, we're not transmitting that over to the transporting unit on there. So that full record, complete record for the non-transporting unit is staying with that agency, and only a limited amount of data for those that are using it is moving over into the transporting agencies, and the UUID was not included in that transfer.
Thank you.
Does that kind of make some sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you say that you have the same vendor, Image Trend, for your trauma registry and for your EPCR system?
Your EMS.
That's correct. We have the same vendor for both, and that's what's made it a little bit easier. But it was also easier when we wrote in one of the original RFPs to talk back and forth. And I do remember when they reviewed that original RFP, says, "What do you want to transmit back and forth?" And it says, "Well, EMS data needs to be part of the trauma registry. It's an important component." And if you understand the history of that, the EMS data was in the trauma registry for a long time all across the board. And then, correct me if I have this a little bit off, Clay, the American College of Surgeons decided we don't need to collect the EMS data because we'll be able to pull it out of the NEMSIS. That puts a whole new challenge to us to get that connected for national research.
And then maybe for Clay, the UUID right now with Image Trend isn't available. Like I don't know how to get it. I know you can pull it from Report Writer, but they said they're making a button of some sort to pull it from Hospital Hub, but we can't get it. So in Delaware, that's why our trauma registrars don't have it, because
I don't know about Hospital Hub. I have to rely to technical experts, Doug, if he's in there or not. The UUID is in the NEMSIS 3.5 image trend record. You cannot see it in the record. That was the one thing that drove me absolutely nuts. However, you can go into the report writer of the image trend system and you can put in, your record identifiers, then you find the value and you put in the UUID, and you can see why you wouldn't want to type that number in. It is going there? Okay. Yeah. All right. I thought so. I just didn't want to volunteer you do something else.
Yes.
Hi, so Eliza Little from Connecticut. I recently went down this rabbit hole to try to figure out what was going on in my state because while I can see the UUIDs on our EMS side, I don't have any on the trauma registry side. So the ACS in their NTD B or S, it has to be, the UUID is automated, as you've said, because it's long. It's an automated extraction policy, and otherwise, the vendors are allowed to or can just put a not value in. And so I feel like until the ACS makes that maybe not a not value be allowed, their vendors have a sort of loophole where they don't, or at least the vendors that our trauma hospitals use in Connecticut. I don't foresee the trauma hospitals paying for an extra extensions, with their vendor that they use. And so this not value seems to be, I don't know, a very easy loophole that maybe we should close somehow.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So as Jay mentioned, right, the American College of Surgeons was incredibly excited about this process of moving the UUID across. They jumped the gun. There were 32 elements that was from an EMS record that would go into a trauma registry record, saving abstractors from putting in 32 elements, right, for every single patient within their hospital. They were incredibly excited about reducing the workload, right, associated with trauma registrars. So they removed those elements, as Jay mentioned. But they allowed you to leave a blank. That's because they jumped the gun, right? So we're in communications with the American College of Surgeons. We're meeting with them in 2 months, and we'll again talk to them about trying to ratchet this down a little bit and make sure that they're communicating to hospitals the value. In regards to price, I don't know kind of what to say about that. I know that there's differences in price in regards to vendors, but that's a market issue, I think. But we'll do all we can to continue to try to facilitate the use of this element. Chip?
Hi. So let's assume we're in the wonderful world where UUID is moving back and forth great between the trauma database and maybe even to the crash records and everything. Something I've always struggled with, and maybe it's just my pea brain here, is now what? There's no EMS data fields to seed EMS data in the trauma data bank. There's very few trauma fields in the EMS records. There's certainly no EMS fields in the MUC data set. There's no crash MUC fields in the EMS data set. Where are people thinking they're going to look at this stuff? Is it they're just going to extract it out into a third data set somewhere and use SAS or something to look at it? Like what? I want to know, like, what's the operational interface for me to look at it? It's great if you're connected on the national level, but there's no data fields for it. It's not even helpful to the hospitals now because most of the software vendors still have EMS fields because the hospitals want to look at the EMS fields, but it's not in the, they're essentially custom fields now. So I don't know what to do with it. Great, we've connected it, but now what?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chip. I think, for example, at the local level within states, as Jay mentioned, those elements were removed from the national collection of trauma registry data. The EMS records were removed. I don't think hospitals removed them. I think hospitals are still collecting those 32 elements. Now it moves over this way for Jay's hospitals. It moves over this way, but they still have them. So they don't need the integration, right? They're still getting it. So I imagine that's still going to the state. But the de-identified data sets right now, we've never been able to link together American College of Surgeons data with NEMSIS data. So we've got the outcome data for every trauma patient, every serious patient in the country sitting in that data set with no ability to connect it to our EMS data. Now this allows that to happen. How does it happen, Chip? Right, a researcher comes to us and says, I want your EMS data on trauma, head injuries. And I'm going to contact the ACS and I want their outcomes. So now we work with that investigator to link, to give them our de-identified data, give them the ACS de-identified data. So now they have the outcomes for research. MUC is a great example, right? So the MUC is the crash data set. So NHTSA owns NEMSIS, NHTSA owns MUC. So now they can link them at the terminal data sets. They don't have to try to get that data on every record, in the MUC data set, right? They can just get them at the terminal data sets. Yes.
Yeah. I might add just a little bit, Chip. As you know, the Evil's state EMS data manager in our Wyoming does the senior tech support for the trauma system, and he kept the EMS stuff inside the trauma registry. So they are keeping the EMS record in there and utilizing it. And surprisingly enough, some of the trauma registrars that are really up on doing the reporting and stuff, if they don't get the data, they're calling me and saying, why am I not getting the data from this? And I'll go track down usually the problem. It's either one, they put down the wrong hospital, or two, we have to have a chat about, you need to fill out your report. And I am going to give you this statistic, and I am going to slam a certain group. It was a flight team. They wrote their record 5 months, 2 days after they made the transport and they got caught. I had a nice chat with them.
Testing. As Adam from Washington State EMS repository, as someone who spends way too much time doing probabilistic linkages between different data sets, I'm a huge fan of UUID and its potential uses. One thing that I definitely see as a limitation is, as Maura mentioned, being able to not just link from the transport unit to the trauma registry, but also potentially first responders to the transport unit, to the trauma registry of the hospital, onto a interfacility transport, and then the final destination. I think whatever way that we can gather all of that, either the big wigs in the room or the big brains in the room, to make that happen, I think would be a massive improvement to the capabilities of UUID.
Let me make sure I'm following you on this. You're looking at the non-transporting agency, so information also being flowed into that. And in the system that we have, the non-transporting agency is moved over if they use that component and put into the transporting agencies, and then identifies, I think it's the agency, there's an identifier in there that says, hey, this is the non-transporting units information that's now in the transporting units information that is now going over to the hospital on that. So it is linking, and we still have this human factor where they've got to click the buttons to make that work.
Yeah, definitely. Our state just put together a report looking at sort of the continuum of care, linking data from the first responder EMS to potentially multiple transfers onto the final facility, and all of that relying heavily on probabilistic linkage and accurate names, dates of birth, locations, just to be able to look at, oh, what time did it take to get them from the incident to through the level 2 or 3 facility, maybe onto a level 1 facility in the state, and just trying to look at accessibility of these levels of care, and whatever way we can improve the ability to pass it on from the initial facility potentially to that transport or interfacility transport unit, I think would definitely improve the usefulness of this data.
I love this room of nerds because the questions have been fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for thinking through all of this. Some really good points about the expectations from ACS and NTDB. Exactly right in that, right now we only get appropriate UUIDs in 13% of our records that are connected between EMS and trauma. And a large portion of those are those not values, because there isn't a field for the trauma registrars to even enter it into yet from their software standpoint. But then the other piece we're seeing is actually that they're not entering the entire UUID or correctly. So that would be another piece for conversation, is to have some parameters around character limits and what it should look like, because sometimes folks are putting in hyphens when they don't exist, and vice versa, just because of the way it displays in whatever PCR PDF they're looking at. Sometimes there's some translation issues just to be aware of. And then the second piece, Clay, when you were talking about researchers looking at that outcome data that can combine EMS and trauma, have there been conversations about providing that outcome data back to the state managers so that we could have it in our repositories? If we're giving it to researchers, there's definitely plenty of good that we can do at the state level too, and of course back to the agency as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this NEMSIS has a e-outcome section. We'd love to get the data, via the NEMSIS route, but getting that data back to states. The one issue we've had to face, and it makes good sense, right, is that states have concern that once you combine 2 data sets that were never meant to be linked together, does it increase the probability of identifying a patient, right? So we're having to make the case with every implementation that no, this is completely de-identified, this is de-identified. There's no additional elements when you bring them together that makes it so that you can more likely identify a patient. But yeah, I think there needs to be more conversations with the American College of Surgeons. How do we make these outcomes more available, to states and to others? That's a really good point. Yep.
I'll add in, there's a little technical glitch that we had. There's a human error problem with the state data manager's education of the trauma registrars. Got to get worked on, but we do have that feedback moving into the EMS records. And I do have a couple of agencies are sitting there going, yeah, we want to see this feedback in our e-outcome section on that. So that's one. Yeah, well, that is using the same software. Using a different software, I don't have a solution for you. I feel bad about that, but that was one of the things they wrote in. And please excuse my manners. I do want to say, as the past DMC chair, I relied very heavily on the council members and stuff like that. And it's also my honor to have Amber following me up as the DMC chair and our future DMC chair, Chad, sitting next to her. And they're conniving back there for more work for us, just so you know. And it's great.
So 3 minutes left. So a couple of questions. Any other questions? We could certainly break a couple minutes early. Yeah, so Eric, I think we're ready now to move to lunch.
Yeah, just one announcement before lunch. Talking with Amber and several other folks and having a hallway conversation. We're going to, just at the end of today, if you're interested in fleshing out the blood transfusion documentation a little bit more, please meet at that end of the room at the very end of the day. We're going to just run through some of the recommendations and talk in a little bit more detail about that. So that end of the room when we're finished blood transfusion. Otherwise, break for lunch. Don't forget to be back on time. And if you have any questions, please see any of us in the hallway. Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, continuing with our presentations this afternoon, our next presenter, Kevin Nicholes, is a member of the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center. Kevin is one of our newer members of the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center. He also serves as a director. Clay looks at him as his deputy, as number 2, as second in command. So you will be seeing Kevin out and about at many of the conferences and presentations and doing a lot of these over the next year, specifically on this topic of community paramedicine and mobile integrated health. Kevin's going to give you some background on what our plans are and then what some of the things that we have already put in place to move into the data collection for these 2 new types of care delivery within pre-hospital care. Kevin.
Thanks, Eric. This is a pretty cool meeting. It's my first time here. So it's this really is something special. I know Clay and the TAC, members of the TAC, would explain to me how great this meeting is. And I didn't really understand truly how much work could get done. Having attended several conferences, you know, work gets done at conferences and they're great, but this one really has been a good time so far. Lots of great discussion. I want to recognize some people really quick since I've got the microphone and I can do that. If you're a member of NEMSIS, IT, Stats, BI, the non-business side of NEMSIS, could you guys stand up real quick? Did they all take off on me? Let's got some over here. We've got Alex, Christine, Tim, Diane, Mental. I think, is Parneet here? All right. Oh, there she is, back there. Awesome. So these people, you guys can sit down. I don't want to embarrass you too long. These guys really help keep the lights on. They keep these dashboards going. They keep that data funnel coming in. And that's just a handful of the individuals behind the scenes. I know it's really easy for us to see the business side and then that side of NEMSIS because you work with us day in, day out, face to face, but there's a whole team in the back end that does a phenomenal job. So for that, my deepest thanks to you guys. All right, so we're going to cover this small topic called community health paramedicine, community paramedicine. It's a small topic which will only take about 5-10 minutes and we can move on, right? So I was a provider technically, I'm still officially a paramedic. I have a license, but that's about as far as my current practice extends. But I was a field provider for about 15 years. The last 3 years of my career were spent in MIH CPMIH role. So this is something really near and dear to my heart. I've seen firsthand the impact. I've also seen firsthand some of the challenges. So here at the TAC, we understand that there is a lot of there's a lot of agencies, CPMIH, it's a big deal, right? Like me personally, I think EMS is on the cusp of something greater than what it already is. There's 2 things, getting outcome data so that we can actually see how we're performing day in and day out at the aggregate level, and then the CPMIH part. So it's really challenging to figure out what is it? What is CPMIH? I know for my agency where I worked as CPMIH individual, it started with high utilizers and then it went to false. Basically, someone found some money somewhere and they found a problem, so they were able to fix that problem. And then we grew on to the next problem. And so I really think of CPMIH as this hub, wheel and hub model, spoken model, where you have all these different pieces. And this is just a barely scratching the surface, but really what is CPMIH? And so at the TAC, we want to kind of figure out CPMIH is a big deal. So what are some of the struggles that they face? Like we said, what is it? How do we define it? We also think, how do we measure it? And then how do we fund it? So the NEMSIS TAC feels like we have a few strengths. One of our strengths is that we're really good at working with stakeholders. This meeting is an example of that. We're really good at seeking feedback from all of our stakeholders and really trying to hone in on those issues. We also understand the importance of a core data set. At the end of the day, NEMSIS is a core data standard, right? Like that's what our bread and butter is. And all of this project, all these things spin off because of that. Eric, you shared earlier that there was like 20 people at the first NEMSIS meeting. In 2019, I think you said it was below 70. We're over 170 people here today. So that really shows that like we have a great group of stakeholders that are invested. We're also familiar with the different types of agencies, whether it's a third service, fire-based, private EMS, air medical, you name it. We're familiar with it. We've dealt with it. We have stakeholders that are involved in that. So the NEMSIS TAC is really going to try to hone in on our strengths to help grow the CPMIH process. So the first thing we did is we reached out to stakeholders. And these are active conversations. And so I shouldn't use the past tense. I should use the present tense. We're actively having these conversations. NAMEHP, NASEMSO, USFA, the list goes on, agencies. But the thing we're most proud of is how much effort we're putting into getting the clinicians' input. The individuals who are using this day in and day out, the ones who are actually going into individuals' homes to try to improve their lives. And so we work with these individuals to try to figure out, okay, what's that definition? So through that, we've kind of developed, this is a draft definition. This is not the final cut. We showed this to the board yesterday. We've got some great feedback from them. This definition is through several conversations with NAEMT, NAMEHP, and all those different groups. And so what we've done is we've taken those definitions as well as some of our own, and we've tweaked them a little bit to try to figure out what is community paramedicine. So this is the draft we have. And so I'm going to give you a chance to weigh in. Give me a second to make sure this works. We had some issues with plugins. So hang on one sec. Hey, all right. Cool, awesome. So if you want to take your phone out, if you'd like to participate, you scan the QR code. It'll give you a chance to, and we're good to go, Chris. It's live, right? Awesome. So you can put in a response. We also have mics that if you have a quick feedback that you don't want to type but you want to say, by all means, speak up. This is a working presentation. So we should start to see some, as people type things in. So, and if for some reason this doesn't work, we'll just scuttle it and have an open forum.
Kevin, just so people know, if you want to participate and you're on a laptop, you can go to that URL that's on the screen as well. So you don't have to use the QR code. That's just convenience for the cell phones.
Okay. All right. Looks like it's working. So it looks good. Awesome. Yeah. So while we're going on and while we're going through that, there's also going to be a definition for MIH because really we see them as two equally separate groups. Community paramedicine, we're really kind of focusing on EMS providers. The MIH section, we're really thinking about EMS providers, maybe perhaps in an addition to, or a non-EMS provider. Maybe it's a social worker. Maybe it's a PA. Maybe it's an RN. Maybe it's something that we haven't even heard yet, that we haven't seen yet. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna give another 30, 40 seconds. Looks like a few people still typing maybe. So those, as we go forward and as we come up with these definitions, we're going to take all this feedback and take it back to the team, hone it in, and then we're going to continue. But we want to be very agile and we want this to be something that we're able to rapidly turn around because this is a quickly evolving field. You know, at the MIH Summit, before EMS World, we heard a stat that said 4% of EMS calls are MIHCP calls. That doesn't seem like a lot, but my response to that is 4% that we know about. So when I was a community health paramedic, our platform, and I understand vendors have really gotten on board and done some great things. At the time, that wasn't an option. So we were documenting all of our MIHCP stuff, either in a Word document, an Excel sheet, or a social working site that didn't talk to our PCR. So I think we have here at the TAC, we have a lot of work to do to get that, because we want to quantify the good work that all these individuals are doing. Okay, awesome. So we'll come back to addressing some of these just so we can keep the time, but there's some great questions, and we have some of these things we've heard, and we'd have some good responses for it. So I'm going to keep going for a second. Let me switch back. Actually, let's see. Let's do, so next one we're going to ask is, do you believe that NEMSIS should develop a core data standard for CPMIH? I believe if I just hit the toggle. Oh, Chris, you want to help me out here? Second. Next. Okay. Nope. Let me click on it and see. There we go. All right, awesome. So do you think that NEMSIS should create that core data standard? That core data standard is not going to be inclusive of everything we need, right? Because we have to be cognizant of how many clicks we need, how many different elements we need. So for our first round, we're going to start with a core set. And we're going to ask for some guidance in a second on what you think that core set should be. And so, I mean, if you look at some of our other providers, some of the non-EMS, Julata, Rainbow Health, MIH providers, data sets, they are talking about having thousands of elements. We're not looking to get that far. So it seems like resounding. Okay. All right. Yes, except for. All right. So anyway, we will continue down this here. Okay. Good. Jonathan, do we have a mic that we can give Jonathan?
Thank you. So it's possible that I might have been the only one on there that said no, and I added "please God" in the front of it. I think it's just really important to ask a soul-searching question, especially in light of this. It's a fine question of if not us, who? And I would say, well, I don't know, 2,500 or so other organizations that are already doing this. So have we done sufficient diligence in this community to make sure we're not replicating the wheel over and over and over again? This problem has been solved. It has been solved in many places. It is being solved nationally. I mean, I cite the Gravity Project as one example of who I'm sure many people in this room are not yet familiar with, but please go familiarize. There's a lot of this already done. It would be much better. Hey, there's another no. That's awesome. To pick from what's out there and tailor. Than to start
we're not. And let me preface that. But we're not looking to create this. We're not going to start from scratch on this, right? Because like you said, a lot of great work's been done. There's a lot of agencies. So what we're trying to do is figure out what's the core group that we can pull from these projects. And the Gravity Project is a great project. I highly recommend everyone go check it out. What of those things can we pull into a core data set so that we can aggregate this and as an entire country quantify, and so that we're able to say, hey, this is a big deal. We want to feed that to policymakers. We want to feed that to federal funders and payers, because at the end of the day, we got to keep the lights on, right? We've got to get paid, and we've got to be able to a way to keep things working. So, yeah, go ahead. Sure, absolutely. That was, yeah, I agree with that. That's great. Perfect. Should the core data set that we've compiled, should that live, the data that comes from that data set, that data standard, should that live within NEMSIS? Does that belong somewhere else? Yeah, so, okay, sure, yeah, thanks, Clay. So this is more of should we, like Clay said, when we expand on it, it sounds like a resounding, we should compile the core data set, the standard, and then the question here is, do we collect those elements the way that they go to the state, the process we have now, they go to the state, they come to us, or do we try to hand that off to someone else? I'd love to hear if anyone that says yes or no and has anything they want to expand on that. I'd love to hear feedback on that. So, well, just if anyone had any additional commentary on this.
So federated data and the ability to say, you have your copy of it and you use the data for your things. But again, particularly if you're going to look at nationwide health interoperability along the lines of TEFCA, shouldn't the data be accessible to them too? And once, especially for social determinants, I mean, once you look at patients who are mobile, patients who are dealing with substance use and housing issues, homelessness is a social determinant or, contributor to health challenges. It also involves emergencies and it also involves other parts. So if it lives and dies within NEMSIS and other parts can't get to it because of NEMSIS's rules, that completely defeats the purpose. But there's no reason why you couldn't get your copy of it to do your analysis and also allow that to live within either an HIE or QHIN type of ecosystem where it's accessible across platforms.
Yeah. Awesome. Yep. Thanks. All right. So some of our goals with this process, if NEMSIS moves forward with creating a data standard, and if that data then lives with us, some of our goals with this would be, we want to prevent duplication of entry, right? So we don't want the provider to be taxed a lot. We want that deduplication of workload to be both EMS, fire, agencies, hospitals, as well as payers, right? So we want to get to the point where we're able to start billing and generating, because one of those concerns we have with how do we fund it is that they're grant funded. At some point, those grants run out. And so we want to ensure that that revenue stream continues, so we're continuing to expand. Some of the things we want to do, we want to make sure we identify elements both for operational use, clinical use, as well as administrative use, because we think there's a difference between all three. We want to coordinate any sort of definitions that we have, any sort of any definitions or data elements with our federal partners and our payer partners as well, because we want to ensure that we can make policy with that, but also, are we collecting the right things to get paid? We're going to work with our billing SMEs to continue that. With the CPMIH patient population, a lot of those patients aren't a one-time response that maybe a car wreck is, or maybe a fall is, or different things like that. Those might need to be a longitudinal record for that patient. So I know I personally had clients that I would deal with over 6 months, over a year. And so we're just adding records to the data that we were collecting. And so we want to see down the road, how can we make that transition from your typical incident base to a longitudinal one? And that's going to be the piece that's going to take a while. I think the core elements we can do relatively quickly. So when we're thinking about how can we do this, we started asking for lines of service. We asked a lot of groups, and this is just a handful of the responses that we've gotten. We've kind of put them in buckets. Some of them, they may have subgroups, things like that. So these are some of the lines of services that we've received from a widespread, the EMS vendors, the non-EMS vendors, agencies, states. So what we're going to ask here in a second is, Are we missing anything? Anything that you're seeing frequently being done by groups? And this isn't like a wish list. This is we're looking for what's going on now. Where can we have that impact? So while you're looking over that, I just want to call out a couple of them that are pretty crazy. Hospice referrals. Who would have thought 10 years ago that EMS would make a hospice referral? Or doing some maternal prenatal care in the EMS setting beyond, oh, you're eclamptic, you're preeclampsia type situations. I mean, these things are pretty insane if you really think about what paramedics are doing and EMTs are doing and nurses are doing in that pre-hospital or outside of hospital care. So I'm gonna switch back. We're gonna ask for some inputs. We'll have to click. Oh, yep, there we go. All right, so what are we missing? What are the lines of services you're seeing within your agencies that you're building as your vendors? Is there anything that we're missing? Okay. Even if you think we may have covered it, if there's something that you think is extremely important, because we have a long list, please put that in there, right? If you're saying like this is the top one, top two that you're seeing, by all means. If I just switch screens, it should stay live. You should be able to, right? Yeah, we'll roll the dice. We'll see what happens. We're all about being agile, right? Here's a list. And this is not an inclusive list. This is not complete. It's an exciting time though, isn't it? Gone are the days of you call, we haul, that's all. I'm going to switch back to the other thing here. Looks like it was still cooking. Awesome. All right. I'm still coming in, so I'm just giving a sec. All right, we're going to go on to the next one here. This is really targeting at our agencies and in our states, but if vendors have any input as well, we'd love to hear from you. What do you need from the TAC? What do you need as far as data to continue your funding or to get funded? What are the things that you feel is absolutely important information to help explain that, to help, spread your message? What metrics do you need to build? Great. This one's seems like there's a lot of ideas with this one, so that's good. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. So what is the TAC not asked about MIH CP? What is the information that we need to know about this? What is important to you that you don't relate to the TAC? All these keep coming in. Is there anyone have any dialogue or input or questions? Show of hands, how many people are working with a community paramedic agency, whether it's they're active in your state, whether you're working with them as software vendors, whether you're an active community paramedicine. Okay. All right, handful. Okay. Let's go through him. So the TAC is actively, like I said, having these conversations, having these meetings, having these discussions with everyone anyone and everyone. We're really reaching out to everyone. Casey and Jen in the back from the TAC have really championed this program. As you all know, Jen will, she backs down really easy, right? Like she never gets her information. So Casey's there to back her up if she needs. But in all seriousness, they've done a great job on pushing forward with this. Randall with NASEMSO has been working a lot as well. We've met with NASEMSO's CPMIH work groups. The leadership, I believe it was Emily out of Michigan. We've worked with her to bounce some of these ideas off. We had a pretty extensive discussion about this in the advisory board yesterday. And we're having these conversations frequently. So if you're interested in participating or giving feedback, please reach out. If it's to one of those individuals or if it's through a help desk ticket, we'll get you set up and get going. So the tentative timeline, we really want to have a core data set, data standard established as soon as possible. One of our goals is to have some core elements identified by August and to turn around and turn those into national custom elements with the intent of perhaps they go into the 3.5.2 or 3.6, whatever the next iteration is, because we feel that this is a big deal to EMS, and we're really going to try to push to give you as a state, you as the agency, you as the vendor, the ability to identify at least a set of elements, so the vendors aren't having to constantly build one-off processes. The states can have something they can measure against other states when they're talking to their leadership. The agencies can have a set of data so they can show that the success of the program in other areas to try to get that funding from their council or get the approval to spin those up. I've heard many stories about agencies where council members were discussing closing the funding on their programs, but they were able to show at a local level the impact through some fuzzy math, but they were able to show the impact, and councils and funders for those agencies say, hey, we can see the value. Let's continue that platform. So that's really our goal as the TAC. That's where we are with MIH. So like I said, solved it in 5 minutes. Everyone good? Seriously, what questions do you have? We have Eric in the back, Jen in the back, Casey in the back. We can pick our brains. We've got a few minutes left still. Anything? Someone get Jonathan a mic.
So CP is a really data-driven process. There's a lot of numbers and math involved in doing things like calculating return on investment, which a couple people mentioned on there. So I guess the question that I would have for this community, especially if this community is going to be determining those data, is how many people in the room feel that they have the know how to calculate that? I'm the one who wrote the actuarial model bit. I've been in rooms asking that of 100 people in a room, and got 2 people to raise their hand and say they'd ever heard of an actuarial model. I don't know how one can hope to talk to payers if you don't know how they speak. So it seems to me like a fairly fundamental question. If you're looking to have this done by August, then between now and August, can we have like a business seminar? Because it seems to me that there are some pretty fundamental questions around how to measure return on investment, measure even without return on investment as a public agency, how to fit this into a P&L, right? Those are pretty key questions. And I don't know if all you're doing is measuring clinical outcomes, you're going to run into the same business problem again, just with the more structured data. So in order to figure out whether the data that you're capturing are going to lead to cash, don't we need to help make sure that everybody feels like they know how to handle that side of the negotiation?
Well, yeah, I think that's a given. So here's the problem is that the subject matter experts to do what's on the screen that Kevin talked about are not in this room. Bottom line. I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody in this room. When it comes to putting together data elements and putting together NEMSIS data and building out things for your EPCR software and vendors, man, you guys are awesome. You're top of the line. I'll put you up against anybody out there in the healthcare industry. You've heard Megan talk about that this morning. People are here from another country to try to figure out how you're doing what you're doing. But the subject matter experts for CPMIH, it's kind of like after 9/11, everybody was an expert in emergency management. Well, I've been doing this for 30 years. Well, 9/11 happened once 30 years ago. That was never something people planned. CPMIH kind of falls into this category for me. We're doing something that's never been done before. So we got to bring the people together. Look at blood. We're talking about moving blood into EMS. There's no payer for blood. The feds aren't paying for CPMIH right now. That's not true. There are some feds that are paying for CPMIH in some types of programs. By and large, this is a private thing. Here's the real problem with this, folks. In 2015, NASEMSO had a white paper written, and we'll make that available as part of our notes. Benji, please remind me to do that. NASEMSO had a white paper written, and Asper and all the healthcare and EMS folks and the all the fire folks that were doing EMS at the time got together and endorsed this paper. And it's a great read, but it's a 2015 read. We were in rooms discussing things like, what is community paramedicine? Where did discussion go? What education are you going to need to do this? What's the patch going to look like? Is this an ALS or BLS person? What skills are they going to be able to provide? Well, I don't want my provider doing that in my state. And we got hung up in all of that. And guess what? We missed. The market was going to take us there whether we wanted to or not. And it did. And now we're wagging the dog. And we don't have the data to support what we need had we focused on that in 2015. That's where I think we are. That's the world according to Eric. And I can show you the white papers and I can show you the information. Here's what I know for a fact. I was at the Florida State Conference with the Gathering of Eagles, and Steve, if he's in here, he's here. I was with his CPMIH folks. It's probably 75, 80 people in the room, most of them doing CPMIH. Had some great discussions. We had people in there, capturing data on their personal cell phones, taking it back, entering it into their report. We had some using the commercial products that are available here in the room. We had some that were buying products. We had some that are building their own. That scares the living bejesus out of me. And the bottom line is Steve's going to be the one that's going to say, hey, in the state of Florida, if you're doing CPMIH, here's what I want to know about your service. And here's what I want to know about what you deliver. And if that's not standardized and available to him like he's used to for NEMSIS, he's going to be getting stuff all over the place. Now, what goes in that? What's included as far as patient care, demographic data, that's to be determined. And that's what we'll work with the state directors to figure out what they want on the regulatory side. We'll work with the medical directors and the people that are actually doing CPMIH in the field to figure out the clinical piece. The payer piece, to some degree, has yet to be determined because we don't have all the payers aligned yet. But we've had problems with payers since the days of CMS, and we're still arguing about what's emergent versus non-emergent. Is lights and siren emergency? If it was ALS and we didn't go lights and siren, is it still emergency? We're still kicking around some of those things. And if we can prevent that from happening with CPMIH by doing some of the due diligence up front, awesome. That's our starting point. Steve.
Yeah, that'll preach right there all day long. I disagree with Jonathan a little bit, love him, but disagree with Jonathan on the actuarial stuff. I don't think we're actuarial folks. I don't want to go down that path. We're paying another company to do the actuarial services for us so that we can prove to our legislators that, hey, this is about a valid model. It works. I think, we got it from a EMS standpoint, a state director standpoint, we want to keep it simple. And not make the perfect be the enemy of the good on the whole thing. So,
yeah, thanks, Steve.
Sorry, thanks, Steve. There's going to be a ton of discussions about this. The date and time that's up there is a date and time that I've set. And I'm becoming more and more aware of how important it is to set tight deadlines, especially for the federal government. So we're trying to establish in that timeline the baseline for this project. It's not going to be 100% complete. I'm not going to hand you a 600 element polished dictionary on the 1st of August and say, hey guys, congratulations, look what we've done. There will be tons and tons of discussions. But the fact that we have NAMI HP, we have NASEMSO, and other agencies listed up here already agreeing on a definition, folks, that's usually the starting point for 6 or 8 months of discussion right there. So I think that, at least in my mind, and I loved some of the questions that were up here, and we will respond to each one of these. We'll make those available as part of the notes. We will make sure that we hit a response to each one of the categories of responses that you provided. They're all spot on. There's some of them in there that were kind of surprising to me. I haven't thought of. There were some that we've talked about many, many times. But the bottom line in here is we're heading in this direction, whether we like it or not. And the question is, 3 years from now, do we want to be poised to answer questions about CPMIH, or do we want to let it up to the world to figure this out for us? And I think that's where I'm at. Brian.
No, Brian from Alaska. I'm the data manager for the state of Alaska. And the issue that we're having right now is we're spending a lot of money on MIH programs, a lot of grant money. We're tracking that. And if somebody asks me, how many MIH calls did you run last month? I get to look at them and say, I have no idea. The pre-hospital systems use the EMS system. The hospital-based systems use their hospital-based systems. They don't communicate in any meaningful way. So I always come back to the, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I don't want to be that. So any help that we can provide in getting this to move forward in any meaningful way would be very beneficial to the people of our state. So if I can be of any assistance, please let me know. But I don't expect it to be perfect in the first week. But
Jen will get your email address.
But
no, we appreciate that feedback.
Other questions, comments, concerns, hatreds? All right, thanks all.
I actually have one.
I'm sorry.
So,
Sorry, sir.
No, no problem. I'm David from Prios. So I'm not from the state, and we have business in Canada, and I find that it's really interesting that you're doing that right now. We have been working with CP program in Ontario, and the government in Ontario has founded CP program for quite a while, but they never had data standardization at all. So the vendor came in with the agency and just filled the void basically, and it's all over the place right now. And we're trying to standardize the process, but after the fact that it's been created, and it's really hard to do it at that point.
Like I said, I would have liked to have started this about 3 years ago, but you know, I don't always get my wish either. So, but you're making a very good point. Yeah, I will say the vendors, those in the room here, and those that are new to working with us, like the Health Calls, the Rainbow, Gelato, or Summon specifically, we actually sat down with them and talked with them, and we talked about compliance. We talked about sharing data sets. We asked them what they would be willing to share. And honestly, it's been almost an open book. They've sent us all kinds of things and said, hey, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we're doing. Anything we can do to help standardize this, we're on board. Their point is they don't want to build custom software for 12,000 programs across the United States and try to maintain it. That may be self-serving, but their point is they do not want to build one-off software. My concern is from the other side is that the folks that think they can just build one-off software, well, we got a grant for $1 million. Someone comes in and says, oh yeah, we'll build a data collection system for that. We'll charge you $250,000 or $300,000. And at the grant period of performance end, they still don't have that software in place. So there's just so many different approaches to this. Jen has spent a lot of time trying to wrap her hands around a spreadsheet of just what's being done in the field, just what data is being collected. And Jonathan, we've looked at the Gravity project very heavily, and a lot of the things that we need are there. They just need to be organized in like an EMS world. So I don't think we need to recreate a whole bunch of things, but we also need to come together on things like assessments for homes. You know, there must be 20 or 30 different types of assessments. What's good, what's bad? I'd hate to go back down the stroke scales, you know, where we have 15 different stroke scales and which one of those is the best and which one should we use and so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of things like that we'll have to take into consideration. I'm not naive at the time and commitment that's going to be made to this, but I do think it's something that you would have to convince me not to do at this point. All right. All right, let's move on. So thank you all.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back in 10 minutes, and there'll be Wheel of Prizes.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Great conversations and great help for us as we try to decide our next steps with NEMSIS, so thank you. Got one more topic, actually two more topics. One where I need a lot of participation from you. Love to hear from both vendors and states about this topic. We've been asked by the Office of EMS at NHTSA to develop an agency level report. So we are dedicated to accomplishing that this next the fiscal year that we're in, but I want to make sure that we're not colliding with the work that some states are doing very, very well, or what vendors are providing within their products. So we're looking for a sweet spot where we may be able to provide an agency level, even perhaps kind of identifying provider level reporting. So let's kind of dig into that. I'll start by maybe sharing with you some work that we did when NHTSA kind of discussed this with us before many, many moons ago, right? 2013. We toyed with this idea of us trying to develop agency level reports. We had a successful pilot. There were several states that participated. There's kind of key things here that we found that could potentially be valuable based on NEMSIS data. One was, of course, agencies can look at how well they're performing in regards to response times or to procedures or following protocols. but it was impossible for an agency to benchmark, right? So NEMSIS provides an opportunity, for example, in this first chart, for them to benchmark their times, I think here, related to a state average or to a national average, right? So we were providing some benchmarking that I think was valuable. We could trend over time. Of course, local software can do that as well. And then we were key on looking at the quality of data with that last chart, like which of your elements are completed with some consistency. One of the other things we did at that time that we thought was incredibly impressive, but it was too complex with these caterpillar charts. It's for statisticians, I guess, and for nerds, I mean, this seems incredibly intuitive, right? Here's every single agency in a state I won't mention. This is version 2 data, so remember that. So there were no pertinent negatives, like being able to identify that a patient already took aspirin for chest pain before they called 911. You weren't able to do that in version 2. So you can see we had a 90% benchmark. Every patient with chest pain should be given aspirin. But you were able to see that's every single agency in a state with a variability around the average number of patients who received aspirin. But you can see the red dots, which are kind of hard to see here because it's small, but you can see where you were in relationship to the rest of the agencies in the state. Well, that was hard to interpret. We didn't spend a lot of time trying to educate on it. So that was a little bit problematic. The process, I thought, was pretty intuitive. So we were trying to strengthen the relationship of state data managers' offices, right? That part of the state, right? Where how many states here have 1 FTE or less associated with EMS data collection? Yeah. So there are some states that work with resources or kind of have trouble with resources. So the way that we built this trial, and we did it in 3 states, is we advertise the availability to agencies. We have our agencies that, are very interested in improving their metrics, right? The ones that are kind of on the cutting edge. There was a sign-up process. The states would approve, hey, yeah, these are the agencies that are really excited in our state. And then the states, they give approval for the agency to participate. They would soft track to make sure that these reports were going to the right place. Then we pushed out monthly reports for those agencies that wanted it, a report to the data manager. And the data manager, if they'd chosen 10 agencies that they wanted to highlight, that wanted to do this, they got to push it out to the agency. So it looked like it was coming from the state, right? We were trying to help promote their relationship and their persona as being the folks that are interested in improving data quality. So that's kind of how we did it with that pilot. We had a chance to talk with, you may need to help me, Chris, how I can bring up the, come help me. Thank you, Chris. The NEMSIS website. So we contacted Amber in Colorado and asked her these questions as well, right, as the lead for the data managers in NASEMSO. And she told us, yeah, these kind of parameters are incredibly valuable. How do I get to the NEMSIS website? Oh, there we go. Okay, so can you find the reports again? Yeah. And she said, don't concentrate on performance, concentrate on motivating them. Maybe your role can be to motivate them. So we showed her the annual report. And Amber said, well, why can't you do your annual report for agencies? What if you just did something like the annual report for agencies, right? So you can kind of move through that just quickly. So this is another approach we could take where we just highlight their calls. They can look at the type of calls that they gave. What's the breakdown by area, by region, by type, by what injuries did they see, things like that. So you can kind of continue to thumb through that. I'll I'll call the question if I could. We want to know, where's our sweet spot? Is there a sweet spot for us? So I want to know if you think there's a direction we can take, and I'd love to hear from states or for vendors like, don't even try this, right? We've got this handled. Or are there states that are struggling with so much responsibility and they have a part-time FTE associated with EMS data collection that we could augment what you do? So I'll stop there and ask for comment. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Are you just stretching, Mark, or is it?
Thank you. Mark from California. So the only problem I see with multiple reports coming out from multiple locations is when they don't match up.
Thank you.
And when they don't match up, then people start questioning and wondering why. So your report could be different than, in our case, the local area EMS agency, which could be different than the state because of criteria or whatever the case may be. And then it just creates a lot of questions that we don't have the time to answer.
That's an incredibly intuitive question, right? So if a software is defining an opioid overdose using this definition, but NEMSIS uses this definition, and then the numbers are different, that's incredibly confusing. That's right. That's right. So that's another issue we struggle with. There perhaps would be great value in us coming together with standardized definitions for core types of injuries or illness. That's a whole nother question, but it does make some sense to ensure that our providers see the same report from their state, from their software, or from NEMSIS. Oh, I got you started.
Okay, so one more thing then. By coming together and trying to develop this, we need to keep in mind that each agency or each local area or each state has different medical directors and they have different thoughts. So we got to get everybody together, and that's a lot of people.
Yeah. Other thoughts? It's late in the day. Hang with me. There's only one more presentation after this. Hang with me. Help me. Help me help you. Oh, yeah, Megan.
This question isn't for me and you didn't ask.
No, please.
Share my opinion anyway. I love writing reports. Having to write a report like this for every agency that you have sounds like a nightmare to me. But more power to you guys. I mean, maybe you want to consider some sort of dashboard, have a password protected site for each state, and you can go in and toggle to your specific agency to see leading metrics or something like that. Still going to have to explain why there might be discrepancies or differences with how the state overall is looking at things. I don't know, but it seems like maybe it would be a little bit less work.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And make sure that's in the notes, right? To have a dashboard that is state specific, and perhaps you could even go down to agencies, right? And just get very basic demographics. Yes.
It seems like a lot of support for you guys. So resources, it seems like, we'll get many, many phone calls a day of requests for some types of reports and supporting those reports when they don't work. So I'm sure you've given thought to that, but seems like a big layer to add.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's perhaps why we're having this conversation, right? We have to not default to nothing. We have to be careful not to default to not doing anything, because it makes more work. But whatever we do has got to be efficient. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, Benji. Yes.
It sounded like you're talking about reports of all the agencies within the state. Is that how I understood that? Because it would be perhaps more helpful for us for benchmarking to see reports with the agencies of like kind, either from the number of calls they run or their percentage of urban versus rural.
Yeah, no, we have that. That's a great comment. So NASEMSO, who will be presenting on Friday, provides performance measures for EMS, and we allow an agency with a general dashboard to go in and say, hey, I'm a volunteer fire agency, and kind of identify their agency and look at the performance for like agencies. Eric's concerned with that, and others, when we look at how often it's not hit by the bulk of agencies, to say the least. So we need to push it. We need to push this out rather than ask people to come in. But that's a good comment. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, Clay, and I agree. You know, this is potential to have some confusion on the local, state, and national level of what measure is which. But one thing that I'd really like to see is highlighting more on the peer review research that's used. And I mean, these people are collecting this data. They need to know it's making changes to our industry. And there's a lot of peer review literature that's coming out that's using NEMSIS data, but we don't know that. And if we could have a tie to that and know how often that's being done, that helps us say, hey, it's being used for something.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And so can I respond to that? So we twice a month, Chris, twice a month working with me, we read through a research paper that came out that month that was related to NEMSIS, and we write Facebook, who else? Facebook post. Yeah. So we're doing that, but again, the number of people that sign up for our feed is very small, right? So again, I would love to help motivate providers by letting them see what great research is being done with the data, but how do we reach them? Right? We have, I don't know, how many subscribers do we have, Chris?
Oh, God, sorry, my headphones. There's like 1,300, 1,600 on Twitter. Also want to point out in this that Monet every month puts together a monthly report of NEMSIS activities. There's also a section in there on research that we push out through our listserv.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So maybe a web page rather than. Yeah, we have a web page that lists the research, but it's just a list. I think we got to make it sexier. It's just not gonna be hit. Yeah. So we got to work on that. Yeah, Jay.
I like this concept as a suggestion for a rollout. If you created just a sample agency, sample report, send it out to states could send that out to their agencies, say, hey, you could get this report, whether it be emailed or however we make the delivery method or something like that, however often we ever come up with that. I think that would be an awesome thing. I use your dashboards. I don't use them enough, but getting an agency report out to them, I think that would be cool. And then get the agencies that are interested in it and let word of mouth continue it on.
All right. So maybe a sample report, right, that we could kind of socialize and see if we're hitting the right nerves with it.
Yeah, it could be fish mine ambulance service for some of us that are a little bit more seasoned. If anybody remembers that, Chip.
Yeah, Keenan. You what, Chip? Oh.
I may have gotten a little bit lost in the PowerPoint I just want to clarify. This is agency level data. This is not benchmarking against any other agencies, regions, types, any of that. Yes, no?
It's an agency level report, and we could provide benchmarking. We could.
I think many of the things that you will provide, they can get out of their software. Unless you do start some level of benchmarking that they don't have access to.
Yeah. And so that's a question. I think for the larger receive and process systems, you provide benchmarking. Is that correct? ESO, do you provide benchmarking? Image trend? Sam?
I don't know the reports that are provided on the state side, so I can't answer that question right now.
Image trend? Doug? So again, I think Image Trend maintains a larger data set, ESO maintains a larger data set, and if they're providing benchmarking off that, again, I would love to provide benchmarking, but I'm going to make sure that if they benchmarked in one system that they have paid for and it shows a different value than what they're receiving in NEMSIS, we've got to try to figure that out. But I think benchmarking is key. If it's different. Okay, so help me, Peter.
Sorry about that, Gavin.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
I think that's a good thing because it helps them to understand the need for compliance, with the NEMSIS documentation standard, both at the federal and the state level. Because they say, I know I did 100 calls, in the month of, what month are we in? October, September. How come NEMSIS is only showing that I have 12?
Oh,
And it doesn't matter which software program it says, we've identified a problem. But that's where I think it's a good thing because it points out to them that maybe they should be following what's going on with their data after their calls are done and they're marked complete or crew complete or whatever the language is. But my original point, which I was willing to go after Gavin because he already had the microphone and mine got stolen from me a lot yesterday. So you guys asked me to be quieter today, at the beginning of the day, be judicious with your comments. And I was not at all yesterday. But I think the other part is before I heard that, Chad, I think the other part of what you need is you need a public engagement plan. Pilots with, some agencies in, I don't know, go back and pilot with Wyoming because, they're the least populated state. So you might be able to hit some EMS agencies. But, to go through and test things out to see what they'd be looking for, while at the same time you're implementing an engagement plan that involves us as the state data managers, to see what moves you from point A to point B. And New York would be happy to engage in that program and working on that with you.
Thank you, Peter.
And thank you for the microphone, Peter. Appreciate that preface there. So I can tell you in Texas, this is actually something that we're currently working on. We're building a report for our agencies to look at their response times and compare to their region and then the greater state as a whole. I think that one concern is response times are very different when you're looking at emergent, non-emergency, interfacility. So I think if NEMSIS was able to do some filtering with the new disposition fields, I think that would be very helpful. If you're including all call types, you're going to be seeing apples and oranges. So we were seeing, 40 minutes for statewide, but only 9 minutes for 911. So definitely something I'd be curious about. And like Peter, we would be happy to collaborate.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Texas and New York would be super to have working on this. Yes. Oh, Brooke. Yes, please, Brooke.
So what I've seen with the vendor products that I'm familiar with is that if there's an umbrella account in a certain region that's using all of the same PCR, then you can compare between the regions and kind of look at that benchmarking wise, but there's not for an individual agency a benchmarking component that I'm aware of. And there's some other products like biospatial or some other ones that people can contract with and get into their collaborative and look at some benchmarking there. What I've been doing is just looking at my own agency data and comparing it with the NEMSIS, the NEMSQA measures on the NEMSIS site and filtering for similar agency types and things like that. But there's a lot of smaller agencies that don't even have a person like me who would be able to do that or be familiar with how to do that. So having something that's a little bit more accessible would be helpful for them, I think.
Great. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and the very website that Brooke is talking about, right, where you can choose an agency type and other things and kind of drill down to agencies, that process allows you to download those figures, right? So you could actually push those out through email to your individual agencies. So we'll work on that idea. Other comments? Yeah, please.
I have a comment. We've discussed this at NEMSIS, I think only internally, but I'm wondering if the vendors in the room would find it helpful if we provided some national benchmarking to vendors to include in their software. We know that you have benchmarking based on the data you collect, but would it be helpful to provide a national benchmark?
Didn't we trial, looking at you, Josh, didn't we trial an API that gave us, it might have just been Compass measures or something like that years ago?
Yes, and we do. Josh is going to describe it right now.
Okay, yeah, the NEMSIS performance measures, there's the dashboard, but there's also an API, a web service API. So vendors can build to that. That'll get you the NEMSIS performance measures. You know, and then it would be up for discussion to have other stuff, maybe basic stats, you know, stuff like that. Yes, yeah, still in production. If you go to the technical resources menu to the web services page, that's where the documentation is for that web service.
So we built that API, for example, Keenan, if Zoll was to build a front end that says, hey, just tell us about your agency. Are you paid? Are you non-volunteer? Are you public? Are you fire-based? And then you can call the API and get the exact data for that performance measure related to that type of agency. So that API is set up now. Chip?
So will you be looking to roll up list values, particularly like meds, procedures, that kind of thing, into the defined lists?
Oh, that's a good question. So no.
I've gone through and reconciled our stuff, and we run about 60% of our values are from the defined lists, and then we have other things that are in our protocols that don't match.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
I could see a service going, wait a second, I got a whole bunch of stuff that we do, like it's not showing up here if it's only defined list items.
Yeah, it wouldn't be just a defined list. We'd have to figure out what to do with those elements. We haven't kind of messed with the like the ICD-10 elements, because you're right. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and I don't want to be responsible for rolling them up, or we don't. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, so I've been helping with the NEMSIS TAC with a project to implement a more comprehensive support for all of those external, you know, those healthcare data code sets and code systems. So there is potential to kind of, you know, to aggregate that stuff better. So maybe the agency used one of the 200 plus different codes for naloxone products. Well, now recently, just over this past summer, the NEMSIS TAC now has the ingredient mapping in its data warehouse. So there's potential to say, now we can just say, how many times did the agency give naloxone, no matter what actual product or brand code they used. Same thing with diagnoses or procedures. So we could play with it, I guess, because like you say, the agency still wants to understand it too.
We've done some roll-ups. The CDC has done roll-up of ICD-10 codes, for example. So we've used the CDC roll-ups in the past, but that's a, we haven't ever pushed that out anywhere. That's only been for research purposes. So we could do that. Other comments? I'm hearing a lot of comments related to us focusing on performance rather than like on motivating or providing. I like the thought about sharing research. I mean, is that where folks would like us to go? We can provide, as was mentioned, maybe some examples of some reports. If you want them based on performance and benchmarking, we'll do that. We'll concentrate on that focus. Yes.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I just think it's an interesting, perhaps, hitch to keep in mind when it comes to benchmarking.
Okay.
I've personally been on phone calls with data managers, I won't say where the data have been flubbed to meet the benchmark.
The data have been
modified to meet a benchmark. So if there was a target, the data are coming through, and whether because of human error or technical error, communities don't want to highlight what their problems are, whatever it is, just to keep in mind if you're going to go down the road, particularly of national benchmarks, some folks aren't going to want to look bad. So to the degree that we have to make sure that that ties in with quality controls on making sure it's not so easy for someone to say, hey, you know, that number actually looks lower than it was, so let's raise it up. And then the person who's doing it say, all right, sounds good.
Yeah, we've got good guardrails there, I think, Jonathan. Thank you, though. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to bring up one other point from Mass DPH and another, even assuming something along the lines of the tools we're talking about go into place, there would be I think it would have to be significant coordination with all the state DPHs in advance of that, because if you're rolling out reports at an agency level, for example, and you're measuring it against whatever the benchmark is, if it's statewide, if it's regional, and you notice some serious deficiencies, whether or not those are even input, like related to the garbage in data or something, the state departments are going to need a plan in place for like underperformers or incentives. So it probably is something that would need to be rolled out in coordination with more than just the state data folks, but also the more regulatory and compliance folks as well.
Okay, that's helpful, right? We're certainly not interested in making more work for folks, right? We're trying to inform folks and help them feel like they have some motivation to do better, right? That'd be our purpose. Do people like the model of us developing the report and then sending them to the state data managers and they send them out? Yes.
I think.
Sure. Right, but he knows Peter.
You betcha.
Yeah, Clay, I think that's the message that we just heard over here was when it goes out, it has to go out with some key messaging to explain what this is and that, hey, it's okay. I'll pick on Jay. It's okay for J services to be in the top of the nation for response times because they have to travel, further than Peter's folks in New York City to get to the scene of a car crash or something. And I think that's key. The last thing I want at NHTSA is my phone blowing up because we put out a report to Wyoming and, some senator's son is on the ambulance service in one of the services that's the worst in Wyoming. And that's what it looked like when the report went out. And all of a sudden, now everybody's all up in arms because they didn't understand why this went out and who was responsible for it. So Dia Gaynor used to say all EMS is local. And that's very true. So our reporting has to reflect that as well. I mean, I know we've had numerous conversations about how this works, but we really have to take into consideration what that's going to mean when it goes out. Because things that we consider to be benign, I think really get a lot of people's dander up. And then if you have funding tied to that in your state, for whatever reason, I think that's another concern. So we do realize those things. The question, I guess I'll put in a plug for Amber and the NASEMSO. The most frustrating part of my job, the most frustrating part, and there's a list, is watching you all struggle to do the same thing with no resources. We hear all the time, well, Gavin said he's working on a report in Texas. I'll put you on the spot, Gavin. How many other states did you talk to about that report? Because I'll bet you Amber did that report at some point, and I'll bet you Chip did that report at some point. Don't recreate the wheel, folks. You have the NASEMSO's data managers group that meets routinely. It's probably the most active group within the NASEMSO. Use that to ask before you start down a pathway, because I can tell you that many of you are working on the same things and you're paying to do it. And guess what? The solution's already there in front of you. You just have to ask the right person. Call Amber. If you're not sure what to do, call Amber. That's what I do. Yeah, seriously, we'll put her number, we'll post it all over the place here at the hotel. But seriously, that is something that is very straightforward. And the other part that helps us with, so this is a little self-serving, is what Clay is talking about doing. We no longer have the concerns that Mark pointed out of, different data definitions because you all developed those. And I see NEMSIS, and I have seen NEMSIS since I took this project on, as an NASEMSO product. If you go back and look at the origins of NEMSIS, NASEMSO's leadership got together and said, hey, one of the key things we want to do with this is be able to compare data from one state to another, and doing it on a Scantron form. And if you're under 25, Google it. On a Scantron form, you can't do that. So, that's my NASEMSO data manager's plug. Everybody on that group is great to work with. They meet regularly. They can help you out with some of the things that you're trying to develop. Don't struggle on your own, please.
Thanks, Eric. Right, so I'm hearing an agency level report that focuses on performance and benchmarking that will go to state agencies for distribution. And we'll work very closely with the DMC, Amber, in regards to the content of that report. Any other thoughts about content, or are we going down the right way? Yeah, Amber, please. Yeah, certainly.
I'm not going to give everyone my number, but good advice. No, this is an Amber comment, not a DMC.
It's okay. I have it. I will.
But I think that there are some models out there that we could also learn from too, like the National Pediatric Readiness Project. They submit their data and they get a report back that kind of is like a report card or score that tells them how well or how poorly they're doing. We could do something similar if we were to evaluate performance. But the piece that the hospitals really like about that is not necessarily their score. It comes with a toolkit that tells them how to do better. So I think if we're going to do some of the performance measures, then we should probably put our heads together to also provide some guidance as to how to improve some of those measures. And there are certainly some things from a data standpoint that we likely need to address in terms of missingness and how you would be able to understand what fields would need to be completed in that sort. So I think there's some more that we could add to just the data piece of it.
Great thought. Great thought. Diane.
Hi, Amber. I just wrote down on my notes the same thing about the Pete's Ready. And before I worked so closely with NEMSIS, I also worked on NEDARC, which is the EMSC National Resource Center and Technical Assistance Center. And part of that work that was done is there were that set of guidelines. It started at the hospital level before it went to the EMS level. And there were a lot of professional organizations that came together to put those guidelines in place. And that's really what drove the survey questions that were asked of hospitals and EMS agencies, and how to score them, how to weight them. And then when hospital emergency rooms or EMS agencies took that survey, at the end, they called it a gap report. And it was generated, it showed them how they were doing their specific hospital or agency, and then had benchmarks against other like hospitals or agencies. And it also came with recommendations built right in to that report. If you scored poorly on this piece, like it had important statements. This is why this is important. And then it led you to the toolkit. So I think that's been a very successful model and something that this group might want to consider.
Yeah, thank you. In regards to standardized metrics, like Diane was talking about, how many states utilize NEMSQA? All right, how many utilize something else? Okay, so very few, right? So you're either using something or you're not using something. You're either using NEMSQA or not. Okay, so that helps us, right? Because NEMSQA is well established and will continue. Brooke's going to talk a little bit about what NEMSQA is doing now on Friday. So that'll be great. Okay, great. That's great. That's great feedback. Thank you. I think we have a focus. Yeah, please.
Frank with CARES. So we do agency level benchmarking now with CARES with their annual report. And I think that having state data manager in the mix is super valuable, but we do have a whole data science role that gets filled by a team that just evaluates like suppression criteria to make in some states there aren't that many large agencies. So if you compare their data, you're comparing like one large city to another. And so we suppress that. So then
Almost like small cell suppression.
Yeah, exactly. The execution of benchmarking at the agency level. Just want to make sure that's resourced.
Yeah, great thought. Yeah. Great thought. Great. Any more comments? Yeah, Jay.
It's just something that comes to my mind just a little bit. We had tried doing some benchmarking since one time. And when we have an ambulance service that the guys are sitting on the corner waiting to go respond just down the street versus I've got an ambulance service, the guy's on his farm-all tractor haying the field and having to get off the tractor and run into town and get the ambulance. I've struggled with benchmarking those two sizes together sometimes. And I've been very cautious not to put anything out that looks like that. And I think that's just one of the things we have to watch out for because, got some services, that's all that community's got in a huge area versus, your metropolitan ones that are always there. They can't be compared to each other on that.
Yeah.
Just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. Good thought. Yeah. Benchmarking is tough, right? It's always based on the normal curve and you'll have outliers on both sides, right? So that will always be true. You have to work through that. That's great. Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, quick, Jonathan. Yep.
Is there any reason you couldn't, somewhat arbitrarily, I guess, but slice the benchmarks based on large agency, small agency? I mean,
oh, yeah.
Claiming, Eric made the same point, right? Small agency for context, but is there any reason why it has to be one set of benchmarks and it can't be rural versus urban? Or?
Oh, yeah. So we now have the ability to segment by the number of patients you see, by whether you're rural, whether you're fire-based, whether you're volunteer or private. So yeah, we've done some of that. I think there'll always be outliers. Or the gentleman on the tractor, right? It's always going to be hard to figure out what to benchmark against. But yeah, we can work on those slices you mentioned, Jonathan, and we can work with Amber and the DMC on making sure that those look representative for 90% of our agencies, right? So good. All right. One more presentation standing between you and social hour. Ben, the onus is on you, Ben.
Hope we didn't sit you up there.
I know, right? Now you all know that I'm the only thing standing between you all and the evening activities. For those of you I have not met, my name is Ben Fisher. Most of my job is helping EMS researchers and honestly researchers who have never interacted with EMS data understand EMS data, how to use it for research. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And then the second half of this will be primarily discussion based. So if you're quiet, I know enough names to start calling on people. And I did bring my glasses to read placards. So when I was getting ready to make this presentation, I found this first study, and it was from 1997. And basically it counted all of the research that was available for the term emergency medical services. And they went all the way back to the 80s to look to see how, 1985, to see how many records showed up in a search. And there were about 5,000 articles for EMS research. And there were only 54 EMS-related randomized controlled trials. And the authors note that there were more randomized controlled trials on minor topics such as urticaria, so itching, and constipation. So in 1997, there was not a lot of research related to EMS data. And when you type into PubMed today or Google Scholar, there are almost, depending on where you look, 17 or 21,000 articles related to emergency medical services. And so the graph in the bottom left-hand corner is what shows up in PubMed related to an article tag. And you can see that from 1997 to present, the amount of research related to EMS has just skyrocketed, well, linearly increased, but significant increase in the amount of EMS research. That research, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday in the agency forum, that research goes into clinical practice. It is a slow, deliberate process that winds up as evidence-based guidelines. So I used this example. This was released last year. This is the EBG for pre-hospital airway management that was released by NAEMSP. So you take years of research, individual studies, eventually that gets compiled into things that affect clinical practice and make protocols. So I think it's really important to remember that this is slow, but that research eventually finds its way into clinical practice. And so I just wanted to make sure to include this example because I think it's really relevant to remember that when we talk about research, it's not just an academic exercise. You know, we're not just trying to like get more altmetric hits on our citations. Yeah, so I use that as an example. The other thing that I think is really important is sometimes that word research gets used in isolation. And I think it's really important to remember that when we talk about other uses for this EMS data, there are social science research, there is policy implementation. I think Megan's presentation this morning was probably a really good example of some of that. And those affect policies. So the data that gets collected gets used by departments of public health, states, local governments for other things other than just clinical EMS clinical improvement. And so I think it's really important to remember that some of these you know, the documentation that gets collected, when we talk about how to improve the research that's available, you have to remember that that can be a really broad term and that can look very different depending on the use case and the audience that's using it. You know, right now there's a state that's using our national EMS data to look at pediatric restraint data for pediatric or accidents involving pediatric patients. So I'm going to kind of turn this around and throw it to the audience because we're going to talk about this in two groups. One audience is the state offices of EMS and how we can help you all, and then the clinicians and how we can help clinicians understand both understand the research and the importance of that and why that comes back to them. So the first part is just sort of a, you know, have any of you seen these policy implementation examples or other research benefiting you at the state level? Some examples I threw out, I know a couple states are doing MAT and some naloxone leave behind that has utilized EMS data, but I'm going to kind of open it up and ask if you guys have relevant policy examples, because if you're doing this, there are other people in this room in particular who are probably interested in understanding how you're using that EMS data to affect that policy. Don't be shy. I remember names. Peter, where's Peter? Well, if any of you do have any, yeah, Jonathan. Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
I'm going to remember that.
I know.
The next time you want to bring an agency live. Yes, you'll be on the 5th Tuesday of February in a non-leap year.
Okay.
What was the question?
Are you guys using any of your EMS data for policy implementation? I am trying to broaden our sort of definition of research here to include policy actions or legislative things that is using EMS data.
Well, we haven't looked at the NEMSIS site to do it, but we have looked at our own data. We have and some software vendors will be happy to hear this. We are the only state that has an additional level of care that's certified by the state of New York between advanced EMT and paramedic. And that level of care is being sunsetted on June 30th, 2027. mid-year, so nothing like adding in a new schematron change that everybody has to adapt to, getting rid of all of our custom values that we all discussed for hours yesterday. But we looked at, where that's used, how it doesn't comply with the national education standards. And we used EMS data to identify areas that were served and potentially underserved. And were those individuals actually providing hands-on care, or were they doing more driving, or were they partnered with paramedics who says, I'm going to do all the good skills and you get to drive because I outrank you? We did that for that. We also looked at whether or not in New York, advanced EMTs used to be able to do endotracheal intubation. And AMTs were frequently partnered with paramedic partners who wanted the airway. Forget the IV line, they do those every day. They get 10 to 20 airways a year. So the advanced EMTs weren't really performing that skill either. So data was used to drive, that level of practice care. But we also we're also developing systems of assessing how effective an EMS agency is in meeting the need in their primary service area, which in the long run will require us to pull in data from CAD in most publicly run PSAP areas to be able to continue that assessment and what impact it has had on response times into that particular area. And that's going to take a lot more legwork to complete that particular research. And as far as opioid, I am hired under the OD2AS grant, and I've been on the overdose grant since I started in 2017. So we do a lot with that and identifying where additional harm reduction services may be beneficial in particular areas by identifying hotspots. We identified one around a treatment area, a day treatment area where you could go and get your Suboxone, thank you. And then you'd go outside and, there'd be a dealer there. So they changed the law enforcement presence there to an undercover operation to get rid of the dealers and make it a safer environment for the individuals coming for their daily treatment because they're making a true effort to improve themselves and the lives that they lead. So no, New York doesn't use EMS data at all.
Perfect. That was opioid data to action. Was that the one the grant you mentioned? Okay. Okay. Well, so that's a really good point. So the grant opportunity he's talking about, I think it's important to remember that when you look at this data for something like research or policy implementation, there is frequently money attached to this, and the money will want to look at outcomes. So they'll want to see, did our funding improve things? And so I think that's a really good example of something where policy implementation can be measured using this, and then that can attract grant funds. Yeah, Amanda. Oh, yep.
Hey, so we had in Massachusetts over the past year, we had a kind of a very novel and fire drill-esque use case for EMS data that we really had not planned on. But over the past year in the state, we were faced with the closure of potentially 8 hospitals at the same time, thanks to a private equity-based hospital system, which won't be named here, but skirting all state requirements of notification of closure and all of that. The state DPH in very short order found out that 8 hospitals in the eastern region of Massachusetts may be closing at the same time. So we had the state legislature, the DPH commissioner, and everyone scrambling to do impact assessments, to do community assessments for the impact of the closure of any one or multiple of these systems on different service lines. And a big piece of that was actually access to emergency medical care services. Because we do have some ambulances, that may dispatch from these hospitals, and it also changes the proximity of and travel times for a lot of communities in Massachusetts. So we ended up setting up dashboards and analytics within those dashboards that drew directly from our state repository on a real-time basis to monitor changes in volume to specific destinations by both town and hospital, as well as looking at any potential changes in median response times. And then we were able to further stratify that by the more acute and serious calls. So looking specifically at those calls that were likely for things like cardiac arrests, suspected strokes. And then we also had to use a lot of EMS data to do projections for potential impacts on services that are in Massachusetts. We have, when hospitals want to expand, they have to meet certain criteria for what we call determinations of need. And those have to be quantitative. They have to be analytics based. And so a lot of these very rapid changes that came faster than we were expecting did end up relying on, at least in part, on a lot of our state EMS data that came in.
And can I ask, who is the audience for those reports? Was it outside the Department of Health?
It was all over the place. Okay. The legislature, the media, definitely the hospital, hospitals within the communities, everyone was on board. They set up like an incident command structure that involved the CEOs of most of the regional hospitals. So a lot of folks were on board and using these tools. So.
Thank you. So that's actually kind of a good segue into the next sort of chunk of this, which is what can we, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I do have one quick comment. I'm obligated to say that there was at least one state missing from your previous
I can only fit so much in the slide. You're all the way up there.
49 needs some representation.
Yeah.
So this is on the local level of policies. We looked at the number of calls coming out of nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and our urgent cares, and what the primary impressions were, and if they were left in the ER in triage or actually in a room, if they were admitted or not, so that we could go to these facilities and discuss how they might better use the private ambulance companies for the lower acuity situations. We were being dumped on a daily basis when you only have 6 ambulances for hundreds of square miles. We just needed to get a handle on that. And so we could take them the numbers and show them, these are the people you've been calling us for. We want to serve you. You've got to learn when to, we didn't say it like that, but here's the private ambulance companies. AMR could be your friend as well as 911.
So in that case, did you involve your like facility licensing folks or other people within your department?
No, we weren't ready to beat them over the head.
Okay. I'll use Massachusetts as my hype guy. So the next sort of piece of this is, because that's a really good kind of relevant example. I think one of my fears in particular is, depending on the state regulatory environment, the state level data can kind of live in a silo within the state EMS agency. So in a past life, I worked for a state office of EMS, and depending on the use case, the EMS data had to stay within the Bureau of EMS. So even within the Department of Health, it was difficult for other bureaus within that department to use that data for some of this activities. And so I think one of the things that I'll also throw to the group is sort of, what can we do for you all, particularly in the state offices of EMS, if there are barriers to sharing that data for research, either within your department or outside of your department with your other state partners. You have seen some of the examples that we've done to kind of encourage data sharing and make sure that people understand, what is or potentially isn't allowable broadly for these purposes. So I think, are there things that we can sort of do for you all that are state offices of EMS to either help facilitate research, help facilitate using this for policy analysis, things like that, that may be helpful? Yeah.
Connor from Vermont. So we have a lot of people using our data, which is great. Few of those people know the nuances of EMS data, and I don't have enough time as a team of mostly one to educate them and then do all the other stuff I actually really need to do. Sure. So if there was some kind of training that we can just kind of push them your way to get them to a point where they're somewhat capable or pre-capable,
Sure.
that would be super helpful, at least for me.
Okay.
Adam with Washington State. More or less the same thing. We've gone from having 2 or 3 research related requests a few years ago to now I think we have 17 active requests in the stages of either before the IRB process or after our institutional review board process. And a lot of the times we have to spend time explaining to them what they're asking for. So any sort of resources from NEMSIS so that we don't have to do that and we can actually, as I said, get to the things we're actually funded to do would be nice. And
I think that's a very common one is you all have lots of things to do and managing lots of research requests takes away from that time. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of it resorts back to the data sharing agreement that we got with you guys, or data use agreement, and loosening that up. I mean, we want to know how bad we suck, and we want to relay that to our legislators to say, hey, I suck in this. I need this to do something better. Yeah. And with not having the ability with NEMSIS to benchmark with other states, and from a one, I can know exactly who I'm benchmarking against. It kind of puts my hands tied behind my back a little bit. Now we kind of circumvented that with our state system and biospatial and benchmarking in that, but it's not comprehensive.
Yeah.
What I was going to add is for what Adam and Connor were saying, is that kind of more detailed, like what are data fields, what do they mean? That could also be a good addition to the data managers training that we were talking about yesterday.
Okay. Jonathan, I don't know, Casey, if you're the closest.
Hi, so I didn't plan specifically to do the flip side of what Steve said, but I think he said it so well. Not to pick on 2 states in particular, but in both California and Connecticut, it has come up in terms of wanting to have access to EMS data and being able to better explain the risk of not having it. And so rather than looking and saying, what do we suck at and want to do better? This is, what do we suck at and we can't improve, we can't access the stuff. For example, and there have been policies around this, a community wants to open a safe injection site, for example, speaking of on the opioids discussion. But as was relayed to me by a couple of these agencies, if the data show that the substance use problem in your community is not injection related, it's actually a different problem, right? It's pills, it's smoked, whatever it is, making the wrong decision can actually make things worse, right? So you've opened up another way for people to get substances they previously weren't getting. So there's some risk management component involved in that as well. And I think maybe to whatever degree it works to scare some people in terms of if you don't provide access to this information and you go down the path that may be being popularly discussed, you can create a downstream error that is both clinically and financially a much bigger hole than it is now.
Yeah, thank you. Was there another one over here? Okay. So I think those are all very helpful. And I kind of take to heart the multiple data requests. I think last time we counted in 2019, I think we were like 85. I went back and looked in 2019 before the pandemic, it was like 85 data requests for the year. And then in 2023 or 2024, it was 350. And then we had recently counted like the whole thing from, I think it was like 2010 to present day. And it was almost like 1,700 data requests. And most of those have occurred in the last 3 to 5 years. So I think the demand for EMS data is only going to continue to grow as people understand that it's this very timely, relevant data source. So the next sort of piece of this that I'll transition to is how can we help clinicians understand that research isn't a dirty word, right? Like it's not bad. This is something that will benefit them, but it may feel very abstract. It may feel removed from their day-to-day work. So I think some of the things I have heard, particularly yesterday from the agency forum, that was very helpful is, good documentation is good for a lot of reasons, but one of them is for effective research. So if we can convey that message that good documentation is good for all of those other research reasons, what comes out of that is good data for additional research, and that it can be used for benchmarking. But I think some of what I've heard, and I really want input here, is trying to find very relevant examples to the field provider. So one of the examples I kind of fall back on is the change in sort of practice and spinal motion restriction. So when I took my EMT basic course a long time ago, I was taught that, the 2 mile an hour rear ender at the Taco Bell drive-through has to have a C-collar and a spine board because they could have an occult spinal cord injury and they'll be paralyzed for life if you don't. And that practice has begun to change. And then we saw this huge stack of evidence, and there was kind of a slow progression to it, which was what everyone kind of knew. And it was sort of this like, this guy probably doesn't have a C-spine injury. And then that evidence, the research and the studies, informed practice until we got to more modern spinal motion restriction guidelines, to where you see things that are, hey, maybe we can set this person on the bed, maybe they can ambulate without us cutting the car apart. And I think things like that have a very tangible impact to the field provider, because now you're not throwing your back out trying to lift someone that probably doesn't have a back injury. I'm looking for more examples like that, and it can be kind of a slow process to collect those because this cycle takes a long time. I think a good example is we right now have a lot of the manuscripts related to COVID in the publication process right now. So for 3 to 4 years after the big spike in data collection from COVID, those are just now hitting publication. So this sort of research cycle is very slow before it will implement practice. But I think finding those really tangible examples is really beneficial for field providers to understand that this research will inform their practice and make it better. And some of what I've heard is agencies are very ready for that. They want to practice with evidence-based guidelines. They want to know that what they're doing is evidence-based. So I'll kind of throw this back to the group and see, have any of the states or agencies, are you guys seeing sort of a desire for this or a push for this? Are you finding examples where this evidence is informing practice or not informing practice? Are they finding evidence that things are not good and so they're not doing things? Nope, I've met my data. Okay, perfect. Yep, Chad. We'll start with Chad and then we'll go over here.
I think clinicians do love research and they want it to be relevant, but I think what we see is research is done and it's out there, but it's not actually put into practice for whatever reason, whether that's a medical director decision, whether that's an agency decision above them. So, you talked about spinal motion restriction, and I can tell you that's still one of the biggest things in our state is we still have agencies that haven't adjusted and moved that way.
Okay.
And even though the research shows that, you look at research related to epinephrine administration and cardiac arrest, and most agencies haven't adjusted their administration of epinephrine and cardiac arrest, even with the research out there. So I think the research is relevant. I think where clinicians, and I say this haven't been one, is where you get frustrated. You're like, this is what the research says. Why are we not doing it? And there's various reasons on why it's not happening. And a number of those, some are driven by state potentially, but a number of those are driven by agencies and this and that. Now, what we have found is not necessarily from the research piece, but just back to kind of the data discussion before is when we're able to go in and show not research, but just look at the data and not do official research, but show them, hey, here's why you need to document a pertinent negative. Or let me phrase this. Here's why you need to document that you considered aspirin on this chest pain patient and document the pertinent negative on why you didn't give it. Yeah. Because now when we run this type of report, we can show that, hey, you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing for cardiac patients. But when you don't do it, it shows 50% and it makes you look really bad. Yeah. And then they don't want to look bad. And so they like seeing it. They want to see it. I think the issue really is just stuff not getting implemented for whatever reason.
Okay.
And that's a frustration.
Well, just to continue off the previous one. By the way, Sundown from Houston Fire Department. Talking about the perspective of clinicians, maybe it's different in Texas, but in my experience, I do not find that clinicians love research, or at least not at the field provider level. And I would say that in trying to say what are some of the reasons for that, I don't know if it's necessarily a question of relevance. I think that in some cases, there's even negative or conspiratorial thoughts about research where I've encountered this where basically they say, well, these questions have been added to my documentation not because they serve any purpose of patient care, but because a doctor wants to do research for the purpose of self-interest or something, which is a negative bias that is not borne out by the actual purposes of the people doing it, but it's out there. So what's a solution to that? I think one way to maybe try and address it to clinicians as an audience is to try and frame it in the sense of what's the community impact of research? And I mean community impact both to the communities that we serve, what is the benefit to the public, but also the community of providers themselves. So, you'd given a couple examples. One I would think was the impact of delivering blood products to trauma patients. Or another bias you encounter is maybe about pain management. That's still out there, and you have resistance to that, talking about the impact of pain management and also things that could, basically changes in response models, such as not running lights and siren stall calls, that can also positively impact the experience of the providers themselves. So I think framing it in community in terms of community impact is maybe one way to present it to clinicians.
Yeah, thank you.
Chip from New Hampshire. So I want to come back to this idea of providing resources to us as states to make our job helping with research, helping people do research a little easier. So I like the concept of a guide. We've all had these people come in and they're asking for research stuff. They've never looked at the data set. They're like, what's NEMSIS? They got no idea. They're just making stuff up. You're asking for things that aren't even in the data set. So some sort of NEMSIS 101 guide for researchers.
Okay.
That's sort of quick and easy. Here's what it is. Here's how this stuff works. Some of those things, even the time definitions we had recently. I've got a researcher who I can't convince that the time en route to the time on scene doesn't matter if you're rural or somewhere else. It's going to be the same whether someone's in the station and responds or comes from home and gets in the station and responds. I can't convince him that for whatever reason, he doesn't get it. Just resources like that would be helpful. But furthermore, when we had a whole privacy policy come on for us, I literally spent months combing through HIPAA laws and everything else, trying to figure it out because I don't have easy access to an attorney at the state. So I'm trying to figure this stuff out. How do I help my privacy community vet these requests even?
Yeah.
They don't know. So having templates for appropriate requests, for the researchers to go in and ask for what are their security requirements, so that they're meeting federal requirements. So pre-vetted templates for that would save me so much time because I'm taking my best guess on some of those things. And it's just, it's really time consuming.
Yeah. We have developed and are developing some of the same products, I think, based on the same need. And I think, with a little bit of tweaking, we would just make them available. So yeah, I that's helpful. Anybody else? And then almost done. Just one more slide. I don't know if the last kind of topic I just wanted to touch on was public health. So I think the last sort of thing that was really salient that came out of the pandemic was we have this incredible data set that is essentially the sort of sentinel healthcare thing and data collection thing for healthcare events. So if there are either barriers to sort of implementing this for public health or barriers or things we could do to help that, I'll just kind of toss that to the group and see if there's anything there or any success stories. Yep. Nope. Sorry. I was going. All right. Eric, I think it was Jonathan in the back. He waved me off. Yep. You're committed now. I mean, the mic's halfway there. You got to come up with something. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So I definitely don't want to dominate the conversation.
That's okay.
There are some really cool examples of this. I can think that came out of COVID. California, Louisiana, Texas, South Carolina, a number of places where, again, going to the previous point about the absence of data, really turned folks on to the idea that those responders are on the front.
Yeah.
And I think there's work to do, but in the days after, or sort of the closing part of the pandemic, there was a really interesting move that has evolved policy. So for example, in California, EMS data was largely excluded from pretty much anything involving the pandemic data response from a public health perspective. And then when the California Data Exchange Framework came about, EMS was a central part of that conversation. And those bumped into one another. In Texas and Louisiana, the immunization registries opened themselves up to EMS collected data in a way that they had never done before.
Yeah.
Because EMS agencies were collecting vaccination data and were sort of, on that front line, and that bumped into some community paramedicine type cases that were on the board before. But all of a sudden, there was this recognition that these agencies had these data within their systems one way or another and needed to put them in that system. So LA Links in Louisiana and the Texas Immunization Registry both opened themselves up to that. So I think there have been some, part of the exercise on the community has been, of this community, has been to have patience, I guess, especially when the disaster is upon us.
Yeah,
Right?
and we've seen some of that at the federal level too, because the CDC now gets the NEMSIS data for their sort of central data repository. You know, one of the mandates that came out of the pandemic was the CDC needed a better way to sort of coalesce all these different data sources, and so now NEMSIS is part of that as well. So, and with that, I'll kind of wrap it up, but I do want to make sure there's a minute or two here for questions or just sort of anything else if anybody has anything. Yes, Peter, you're the only thing standing between every 170 people in the pool party. So yeah, no pressure.
Thank you, Eric. No, it's just a compliment to you. One of my program research specialists, we're chatting on Teams right now because it's a little late in the East Coast, and he just got promoted. And he's completed his doctoral thesis and asked me to thank you for your help with it.
Well, tell him where's Parneet. So Parneet is working on his data request right now. So Parneet, it's Buto. So, you know, yeah. Well, thank you very much. All right.